Chapter 1373. There were 3 large platforms in Boyu City, and they were respectively the rising balcony, the moon-building platform, and the star-gazing platform. All of them were constructed to the point that they were lofty like mountains, and if one stood at the top of the platforms, one would be able to have a complete view of the entire city. Net on the 3 platforms, there were 3 star essences from beyond the heavens. It was said that by worshipping them, one could communicate with the sun, moon, and stars. These 3 places were originally under the command of the high priest Gong Xiao, Gong Chang, and Gong Ta. Later on, the 2 of them broke through the boundary and left. The rising sun and building moon platforms respectively selected their clansmen to take over their positions. Now, these 3 places are under the control of the sacrificial moon Gong Xianzhao and the sacrificial sun Gong Xianao. As for the star-viewing platform, after Gong Ta's death, the 100 countries of eastern wasteland split, and the star essence on this platform was also lost. Thus, for thousands of years, there was no star priest Xianzhao, but this was one of the 3 platforms after all, so mystic cultivators were sent to guard it. Later on, it gradually became a place to practice martial arts. Today, on the star-viewing platform, Gong Xianzhao stood on a high place with a few clan elders. He was scrutinizing the 20 disciples in front of him who were full of heroic qi. These disciples were carefully selected from the clan and sent here, ready to be sent to various forces to compete after 10 years. From the age of 10, these people were sent to fight with demons and other races, and were only allowed to return to the clan when they cultivated to the spiritual image state. Not to mention their experience, in the Gong clan, they could be said to be the group of people with the highest combat ability, except for a few great mystic cultivators. At this moment, one person attracted his attention. Most of the people present wanted to release their qi and blood to show their strength, but this clansman didn't show any signs of abnormality, which made him even more special. No matter whether this person was really capable or not, at least his wisdom was better than his peers. He asked, "Who is that?" A clan elder looked at him and said, reporting to Moon Priest, "He is Gong Dan, the descendant of Gong Ta Great Priest's 19th son. He is 398 years old. He is quite accomplished in the qi and blood pattern, and has been in the spiritual image state for 100 years. Gong Xianzhao frowned. Nearly 400 years old. His cultivation time was still too short. Even if he was outstanding in some aspects, it was still too short. Even if he was outstanding, it would be difficult to make up for his lack of qi and blood. But considering that he was a mystic master, if he could make good use of the qi and blood pattern, he could often increase his combat ability. Gong Xianzhao decided to give him a chance. The sect elder immediately came out and said, "Gong Dan, come up the stage." Under the envious gazes of his clansmen, Gong Dan stepped onto the stage. However, his expression was calm, and he clasped his hands together in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. Gong Dan pays his respects to Moon Sacrifice. Gong Shizhao was quite satisfied with his composure and said, "This time, I have chosen you to come out to fight with the experts from all over the world. Ask yourself, how can you compare to them?" Gong Shan said, "I have my own reliance, but I haven't fought with my fellow Taoists of the 9 continents, so I don't dare to talk nonsense." Gong Shizhao replied indifferently, "Then how can I trust you?" Gong Dan, however, looked straight at him and said, "Sacrificial moon can give it a try." Seeing that he was so confident, Gong Shizhao was somewhat expectant and said, "All right." He turned his head and said to a Taoist beside him, "Taoist D. Sorry to trouble you." Taoist D cupped his hands and said, "Yu Ji is too polite. I have received a lot of kindness from your eastern wilderness. There's no need to trouble me." Back then, not only were there disciples from various sects, there were also many itinerant cultivators who came to the mountain and sea realm. Many of these people were lured by the benefits and sought refuge with the 100 nations of the eastern wilderness. The ministers of the various nations didn't look down on them because they didn't have a high cultivation base. Instead, they treated them as esteemed guests. For example, Taoist D was originally a core formation cultivator. However, after he became a consecrator of the Eastern Wilderness Sacred Nation, he became a core formation cultivator. After he became a minister of the Eastern Wilderness, the Gong clan didn't hesitate to use a large amount of external medicine to push him into the Yuanying realm. Furthermore, they managed to exchange for Dharma treasures and medicinal pills for him, so he was very grateful to the Eastern Wilderness. He was willing to serve them for the rest of his life. He walked down the stage and smiled amiably at Gong Dan, saying, "I will use my Dharma treasure in a moment. Taoist, please be careful." Gong Dan's expression turned serious. He put his hands together and bowed, saying, "Enlightened Master, please make your move." Taoist D immediately made a hand seal, and a sparkling jade bracelet flew out of his body and landed on Gong Dan. However, Gong Dan did not dodge it. He only swelled his qi and blood, and threads of blood threads floated outside his body. They were like a thick net that enveloped his entire body. When the Dharma treasure landed and came into contact with it, a collision sound was heard. Gong Dan was actually blocked outside. Taoist D wasn't surprised. The mystic cultivators of the Eastern Wilderness were also people who were good at learning and adapting. Previously, they had never encountered Taoist cultivators, so they were at a disadvantage in almost every aspect. However, after understanding the Taoist techniques of Taoist cultivators, they had figured out many ways to counter them. The situation before him was extremely common nowadays. However, he was only using this to see how much this Gong family disciple could endure, so as to avoid accidentally injuring him. Now that he saw that he was indeed capable, he put away the jade bracelet into his sleeve, took out a golden hammer, and flicked it lightly. In that instant, Gong Dan only saw a flash of golden light in front of him. Before he could react, he felt as if he had been hit by a mountain. All the tendons and bones in his body felt like they were about to break, and his entire body started to tremble. He retreated more than 10 steps, but in the end he didn't fall. Instead, he held on. Taoist D put away the golden hammer and praised, "Not bad." Gong Shizao looked surprised. He knew that the golden hammer was a profound artifact, but Gong Dan was actually able to block it head-on with his qi and blood pattern. Furthermore, he didn't seem to be injured. This was not simple at all. He asked, "What kind of pattern did you use?" Gong Dan said, "It's the sturdy gold pattern that is commonly used in the 100 Nations." Gong Shizao asked again, "An ordinary sturdy gold pattern can't block a profound artifact. As a Xian master, did you make any changes to this pattern?" The method of qi and blood pattern had been passed down for close to 10,000 years. Until now, there were already more than 1,000 kinds of patterns on the surface. However, there were also many secret patterns that were passed down in secret. They were all in the hands of the ministers of the various nations, and they were never passed down to outsiders. However, there were no less than a number of Xian masters who were deeply immersed in this Tao who would make some minor changes to make it more suitable for themselves. Gong Dan's body shook, and a layer of skin came off his body. He said, "I didn't make any changes. I just wore 2 layers of skin with the sturdy gold pattern on my body." 2 layers? After Gong Shizao heard this, his expression was startled. Then, there was a hint of excitement. He reached out and grabbed the skin. After looking at it carefully, he raised his head and asked, "What kind of skin is this?" Gong Dan replied, "This is the skin of a foreign species from the western wastelands. It's called gray ghost. It lives underground for a long time and is somewhat similar to the people of the 100 Nations. It has a pair of wings under its armpits and is extremely vicious. A few days ago, I bought over 100 of them from the slave market. Unexpectedly, I discovered that the skin on the 2 wings of this race can not only allow me to draw the qi and blood pattern, but can also display more than 80% of its original function. Because the effect of the qi and blood pattern was directly related to the size of the pattern, one person could only draw 3 to 5 types at most in order to truly display its power. It was impossible to draw more than that. Therefore, many people thought of ways to add another layer of pattern on the outside. However, most of the skins of demons and foreign species were not compatible with the human body, and the effect was often less than 1%. As for using the skin of the same race, it was not that no one had tried before. However, usually, only those who cultivated the way of qi and blood, and whose cultivation was similar, would be able to display the greatest effect. However, in this way, it was very likely to cause the same race to kill each other. Therefore, the 100 Nations soon banned it. For thousands of years, the 100 Nations of the Eastern Wastelands had always wanted to find a suitable substitute from the bodies of demons and foreign species. However, in the past, the territory was too small, and the source of the living creature's skin was limited. There had never been any progress. Gong Shizeo would never have thought that today he would see a suitable type of skin. He stroked it and asked, "Just now, you said that you have 2 layers of this skin on your body. What about more than 2 layers?" Gong Shizeo replied, "My cultivation is still shallow. If I put on too much skin, the power of qi and blood won't be enough to activate the patterns on it. Now, 2 layers is already the limit. 3 layers will instead obstruct the flow of qi and blood. However, if it's a clansman who has accumulated a lot of qi and blood, 3 or 4 layers won't be a problem. It's just that the more layers there are, the less effective it will be. Instead, it will weaken one's body. From the looks of it, 6 layers should be the upper limit." A smile appeared on Gong Shizeo's face. He originally wanted to select a group of talents, but he didn't expect to receive such a pleasant surprise. If it was really as Gong Shizeo said, then the battle prowess of everyone here would increase by more than a few levels. He said, "Gong Shizeo, then you've made a great contribution. If what you said is true, I'll personally go and ask for a reward for you." Gong Shizeo bowed and said, "Thank you, Moon Sacrifice." Gong Shizeo sighed in his heart and said, "Who would have thought that the skin of foreign species suitable for carving patterns would actually be in the Western Wastelands? If it wasn't for the unification of the 4 regions, how would it be possible to find it? It seems like what fellow Taoist Jiuzhou said is true. No matter what kind of cultivation method, only by finding more external objects to make up for the deficiencies can it truly be carried forward. If this object had been discovered earlier, the situation in the Eastern Wastelands would definitely be very different." Just as he was pondering, he suddenly thought of another matter. He raised his head and asked, "Immortal D, in your opinion, if a cultivator from a major sect were to make such an attack, would he be able to break this 3-layer qi and blood pattern?" Taoist D cupped his hands and replied, "I'm a rogue cultivator, so this is the best I can do. However, those disciples from the major sects have magic power, divine ability, and even magic treasures that far surpass me. I can't break it, but it doesn't mean that they can't." As he said this, he saw that the disciples of the Gong family were slightly disappointed, but he smiled and said, "But there's one thing. Just now, I and this fellow Taoist Gongdan are only a few dozen feet apart, and he didn't dodge at all. Yet, the pattern on his body can still bear it and defend very well. If they were to really fight, they would be at least 300 feet away, but it still wouldn't be so easy to break it. Moreover, in I's opinion just now, this pattern is just for ordinary use. If it were a secret technique from each clan, it would be different." When everyone heard this, they all knew that it was a spirit formation. Although Gongdan was a mystic master, his cultivation was still shallow. If a grandmaster from the palace could be invited to carve the pattern, he would definitely be able to defeat him. All the people of the Gong family almost instantly made up their minds. They had to find more gray ghosts and try to keep them in captivity so that they could harvest the skin of the 2 wings. If necessary, they could also try to mix the blood of the gray ghosts with other clans to see if they could obtain a more compatible skin for their own use. Chapter 1374. Junchen Realm, Xiaoyuan Heaven Region, Bohuan Earth Star. A middle-aged man with a jade-like face and a long beard, dressed in a red robe embroidered with stars, birds, and fish, with a hanging board on his head and a leather belt around his waist, sat in a jade tower in the palace. This person was the Grand Priest Shao, who had become an emperor in Junchen Realm. As he breathed in and out, strands of purple qi could be seen flowing into his body. Then, a scarlet-red light rose from the top of his head and slowly rose into the sky. Then, strands of red light floated out. If there were cultivators of the same generation watching from outside, they would discover that there was no sun in the sky above Earth Star. All the wind, water, sunlight, and warmth were actually controlled by the power of his qi and blood. At this moment, if he were to stop or move to another place, the living beings on Earth Star would definitely wither away. Therefore, in terms of status and substance, he could be considered as the supreme monarch who ruled over the life and death of all living beings. After a long time, he stopped, and the red light above him gradually retracted back into his body. He noticed that his power had improved a lot, but there was not much joy in his expression. He thought to himself, if this goes on, even if I cultivate for thousands or tens of thousands of years, I won't be able to reach Kong Ying's level. If I fight with him, I will definitely lose. He frowned. Do I really have to try that kind of method? He shook his head. It's still too dangerous. My lifespan is not up yet, and I still have a chance. I can wait a little longer. After he and the other official entered Junshin realm, they kept searching for a way to break through. Because the qi and blood path they cultivated was not the same as the cultivators of Junshin, they experienced some twists and turns in the beginning. In the end, they relied on their magic power that was comparable to an imperial emperor to become an emperor in their own heaven. Originally, he thought that when the two of them worked together, there would be very few opponents in this realm. But when he met the chief of Yuliangism, Kong Ying, only then did he completely give up on this idea. After he joined the Yuliang order, he lowered his pride and asked for guidance. Finally, he saw an opportunity to continue climbing higher. However, at the same time, he realized that his cultivation was too far behind Kong Yin's. Hence, over the years, he had been cultivating in the Yuliang order. He had been trying his best to catch up, hoping to shorten the distance between them. Footsteps could be heard from outside as a white-haired Taoist entered the hall and bowed to him respectfully. He handed over a jade talisman and said, "Your Majesty, Wu and Song have sent another message. May your Majesty please take a look." Gong Xiao took it and casually flipped through it. He raised his head and asked, "What do you think?" The white-haired Taoist said, "There has been a lot of news from Wu and Song these past few years. The details of the sects of the 9 continents have more or less been found out by them. I think it won't be long before our Yuliangism will launch a large-scale attack on the Blue Sky realm, right?" Gong Xiao smiled and shook his head. He threw the jade talisman aside and said, "Attacking the Azure Sky realm? It's easier said than done. I'm afraid sect leader Kong doesn't have the confidence to do so." The white-haired Taoist was puzzled. But Gong Xiao said calmly, "Let's not talk about the fact that the Qi accumulation palace is in conflict with Yuliangism. Let's talk about what Wu and Song said. Every single one of them is contradictory. Their judgment of the sects of the 9 continents is also sometimes strong and sometimes weak. There's no certainty. This kind of news is most likely fake." The white-haired Taoist was shocked. How can this be? A restrictive spell was planted in the bodies of these two people. They would never betray the sect. Could it be? Could it be that these two people are already dead, and this is just news sent by the people of the 9 continents? Gong Xiao said, "It might not be that these two people are dead. They could also be under some kind of spell, causing their minds to be clouded. It's still unknown." The white-haired Taoist was shocked. Then he frowned and said, "If my lord's deduction is correct, these cultivators of the 9 continents are not easy to deal with." Gong Xiao said, "It doesn't matter. Our sect leader is extraordinarily powerful. With him supporting us, we don't have to worry about this matter." He had no qualms about gossiping about Kong Yin behind his back. As an emperor, there was no need for him to consume the jade of knowledge. He was only a disciple of the Yuliang order because of Kong Yin's ability. If the chief could maintain his dominance, he would continue to be respectful and submissive. However, if the chief was injured or defeated, he would not mind stepping out to give him a push. The white-haired Taoist said worriedly, "I'm just afraid that your Majesty will be pushed out." Gong Xiao shook his head. Kong Yin thinks too highly of himself. He would never do such a thing. Moreover, if there is someone that even he finds difficult to deal with, it would be useless even if we were to go up. He would not be so unwise. A servant's voice came from outside the door. "Your Majesty, the messenger from the sect has arrived." Gong Xiao's expression changed. "Invite the messenger into the hall." Half a minute later, a Taoist dressed in a red robe walked into the hall. He held a green confusion lamp in his hand. With this lamp, he could escape into Kong Yin's little world at any time without fear of being attacked by outsiders. The Taoist walked into the hall and bowed. "Greetings, Master Huan." Gong Xiao said, "May I know what instructions does the sect leader have for me?" The emissary said, "The sect leader and Yang Chuan discussed Tao and agreed to meet again 60 years later. Our two heavenly regions are quite far apart, so the sect leader is going to head to the Qi accumulation palace now, but the sect needs someone to hold the fort." He took out a scroll and handed it over. "The sect leader's arrangements are all in it. Huan Jun will understand once you read it. Take a look and you will understand." The white-haired Taoist went down to receive the scroll and placed it on the table. Gong Xiao took a look and a strange expression appeared on his face. After a while, he nodded. "I understand. Please report back to the sect leader. I will do as you say." In the Cheongzhou heavenly region, outside of Earth's star, two forces were fighting. Rays of rainbow light shot everywhere and Qi of Dharma collided. Every now and then, cultivators would be killed by the flashes of lightning. There were also Dharma boats that were flying around that were corroded by the gray fog that rose from the surface of the earth. Then the boats disappeared. Above the virtual sky, there were three Dharma forms colliding with each other, making earth-shattering noises. For a moment, it was hard to tell which side was winning. About 10 days later, there was a sound of collision. Two Dharma forms suddenly retracted and turned into two rays of light. They left behind a cloud of black fog that slowly parted. Sima Quan appeared from within and watched the remaining hundreds of Dharma boats slowly retreating under the lead of the two Taoists. Ever since he took over the Cheongzhou heavenly region, this was the second time that Yuliangism had attacked. Not long after, there would be a third attack. A dim light flashed and an elder came to his side. He bowed to him and said, "Perfected Lord, the Grand Gongxing formation has been damaged. It seems that this formation plate is not as powerful as the rumors say." Sima Quan snorted and said, "The Grand Gongxing formation of the Qi accumulation palace is not bad. It's just that the one covering us is only an incomplete formation. Otherwise, even if Yuliangism had several times more forces, they still wouldn't be able to break in." When the elder heard this, he couldn't help but say angrily, "Damn it. He wants us to fight for him, but he's not willing to give us any real help." Sima Quan didn't care and said, "This is expected. We are people who have been appointed and not disciples of his palace. Naturally, he won't give us anything good. However, in the current situation, if you don't want to join Yuliangism, then you can only rely on the protection of the Qi accumulation palace." The elder sighed. Yuliangism had too many rules. He couldn't stand it. Now, only the Qi accumulation palace could fight against it. Sima Quan asked, "How are the casualties among the disciples?" The elder Daoran said, "Perfected Lord, don't worry. The casualties were all rogue cultivators who came to join us a few days ago. We didn't lose many disciples." Sima Quan said, "The people that Yuliangism sent here are also not direct descendants of the sect. These two were just probing. I'm afraid there will be a real fierce battle." He waved his sleeves and turned into a ray of light. When he arrived at the palace on the main peak, another ray of golden light flew over. When it neared, a disciple came out and bowed. He said, "Perfected Lord, there's news from the palace. It says that all the masters of the heavenly regions are to guard their borders and are not allowed to leave without permission." Sima Quan asked, "Where is he?" The disciple lowered his head and said, "The messenger left in a hurry and only left this order." He raised his hands and handed over a roll of silk. Sima Quan took it and opened it, but he couldn't guess the purpose of the Qi accumulation palace. He thought for a while and let his disciple leave. He then went to the back of the hall and walked up a stone staircase to the belly of the mountain. He came to a pond that was rippling with starlight. He took out a spell and the lake in front of him flashed with spiritual light. He could have used this to talk to Cultivator Rao, but after casting the spell for a while, Cultivator Rao didn't respond. His eyes flickered. He had a feeling that something big was about to happen. After thinking for a while, he decided not to think too much. With the big boat that cultivator Rao gave him, even if something went wrong, he could escape in time. Moreover, he had countless doppelgangers outside. Even if this body died, it wouldn't cost him his life. Thus, he turned and walked out, ordering his disciples to seize the opportunity to repair the seal. However, unexpectedly, Yuliangism didn't invade again. He secretly asked around for information, but found that it was as quiet as a pool of stagnant water. He couldn't see through this strange situation, but he didn't dare to relax because of it. He continued to strengthen the formation door. Time flew, and more than 10 years had passed. On this day, when Sima Quan was meditating, there was a flash in the star pool in front of him, and a Taoist figure appeared from within. When he sensed it, he immediately stood up and cupped his hands, saying, "Wanderer pays his respects." Cultivator Rao's expression didn't look good. He said in a deep voice, "Fellow Taoist Quan Ming, I'm here to tell you something. That old dragon wasn't careful a few days ago and was trapped in the formation that Kong Ing and Yang Chuan worked together to seal." Sima Quan's heart shook. Kong Ing and Yang Chuan? Why are they working together? Cultivator Rao's face darkened. Yang Chuan's so-called secluded meditation for the past 10 years was actually not in the sect. Instead, he went to set up a formation in the wild heavenly region. This time, there was news that he was going to fight Kong Ing. Although the old dragon didn't go, he let his guard down and fell into the trap. It's not a big deal that he fell into the trap, but it's a pity that all my preparations were wasted. Sima Quan's thoughts raced, and he quickly sorted out his thoughts. Clearly, Kong Ing and Yang Chuan both felt that the dragon monarch was a hindrance, so they made the first move to get rid of him. He thought to himself, Kong Ing and Yang Chuan didn't make a move the last time they met, so they must have been discussing how to deal with this dragon monarch. I wonder what his next step will be. If the two sects were to fight again, that would be fine. But if they are working together like this, then things are not looking good. It's very likely that their next step will be to invade the mountain and sea realm. To be continued. Chapter 1375. Sima Quan felt that the situation had reached an extremely critical juncture. Although the Yuliang Order and the Qi Accumulation Palace might not really join forces due to the many years of conflict that had accumulated between them, there was still the possibility of it happening. The mountain and sea realm wasn't ready yet, and if war broke out between the two realms, it would be very disadvantageous to the sects and clans of the 9 continents. No matter what, he had to try to stop it. After thinking for a while, he came up with an idea. He took half a step forward and said in a low voice, "Wonder, my chance has come." Rao Sanren was still immersed in his vexation. He subconsciously asked, "What opportunity?" Sima Quan said, "Since Yang Chuan is setting up the formation outside, even if the old dragon is dead, his subordinates should still be alive. The power and rations that he has accumulated over the years should not have been taken away. You can think of a way to take them all. This is an opportunity that cannot be missed." When Sanren Rao heard this, his expression did not change. However, it was clear that there was a flash of light in his eyes. It was obvious that he was moved. Previously, he was stunned by Kong Ing and Yang Chuan's actions, but he was afraid that he would be implicated as well. Thus, he was at a loss of what to do. Now that Sima Quan had reminded him, he immediately came to his senses. Perhaps, this matter was his opportunity. He thought for a moment and said, "Fellow Taoist, you are right. The old dragon is not trapped in his own lair. His lair is truly without a leader. If there is no one to control it, it might be destroyed by the two clans. However, if I go there now, I can take over the dragon sovereign's forces." Sima Quan was secretly delighted. His original intention was to incite Rao Sanren, but if he did not have this intention, or if he could not do it, then there was nothing else he could do. He thought to himself, looks like this Sanren Rao has a deep connection with the dragon monarch, and is definitely not as simple as he said. Otherwise, where would I get the confidence to clean up the mess? Wanderer Rao said, even if that old dragon can be dealt with, Kong and Yang can't remain unscathed. I still have a lot of time. At this point, he raised his head, and his tone became more sincere. Fellow Taoist, thank you for reminding me this time. After that, we can discuss the grand plan together. Sima Quan cupped his hands and said, "You speak too seriously." Sanren Rao said a few more words, and with a flash of light in the star pond, the figure retreated. Sima Quanji said, "From this person's last words just now, it seems that the dragon monarch left something good at his place, so he can't wait to retrieve it. But no matter what it is, rather than letting it be taken away by those two families, it's better for it to fall into this person's hands." However, before doing that, he needed to send word back to the mountain and sea realm as quickly as possible. He turned back to the secret chamber, activated all the restrictions, and opened the two-realm dial. He drew upon the spiritual vigor around him. A moment later, a light leaped out from the dial and a big-headed boy slowly appeared. He cupped his hands and said, "Master Sima greets you." Sima Quan recognized the other party as Zhang Yan's attendant, Jing Yu. "Is Jinren Zhang here?" "Sima has something to report." Jing Yu replied, "Master is in seclusion and must not be disturbed. If Master Sima has something to tell Xiao Tong." Sima Quan only needed to send the news to the mountain and sea realm. Even if Zhang Yan did not care about external affairs, the 9 continents still had Sect Master Qin and Sect Master Yu. There were naturally people who could make decisions. Therefore, he did not hesitate and immediately explained everything that had happened in the Junqin realm. After listening, Jing Yu said solemnly, "Don't worry, Master Sima. Xiao Tong will immediately report this to the sect." Sima Quan cupped his hands and disappeared. Jing Yu did not dare to delay. He immediately went outside. Zhang Yan had already told him that if there was anything important during his seclusion, he could report it to the left and right hall masters, and they would report it to the sect. When he arrived at the main hall, he first took a brush from the table. After writing it down, he handed it to the top. There was a flash of light on the top of the hall. It was the seal of Hall Master Du Jin. There was a seal on it. He looked at it again, and then sent it out. It turned into 2 beams of light and flew towards the left and right halls. After a while, he saw 2 beams of clear light rise from the 2 halls and fly towards the outside world. Only then did he relax. In the heaven-mending formation pavilion, Qi Yuntian sat on the main seat in the middle of the hall. To his right sat the 10 mystic cultivators of the 100 nations of the eastern wasteland, led by Gongshuan Zhao. Below them were the 2 elders of the Heart Butterfly tribe. Below them were the 2 demon saints of the Bull Dragon tribe and the Lu tribe. To his left were the Taoist masters of the Xianling tribe and Dongtian tribe. Each tribe had 1 person. This time, it could be said that all the heroes of the 4 borders and 4 regions had come. Even the Heavenly Ghost tribe had come. However, as they were the subsidiary tribes of the 9 continents, their great sages did not have the right to be here. In the middle of the main hall, there was a ball of spiritual light. What was shown was the scene of the disciples fighting. In order to show fairness, the disciples who fought could not surpass the 500-year lifespan limit. As for demons and demons, it could be counted after they gained spiritual intelligence. As for the wild demons, they were not qualified to be here and were naturally excluded. Because there were many people from all directions, they were divided into 36 peaks to fight. Each peak could have 1 winner, and 3 months later, they could enter the grand competition. At that time, regardless of victory or defeat, they would be rewarded generously. As the sect leader of the Yaoyin sect and the Taoist master of the paradise, Wei Zihong was also sitting on it at the moment. He looked around, and not long after, he noticed that there was a strong demon on the top of a mountain who had already transformed into a human. He had already defeated several opponents, and logically speaking, he should have gone down long ago, but he still had no intention of stopping. He immediately became interested and asked, "Who is this?" Lu Yin, who was sitting on the opposite seat, said, "Fellow Taoist, this is a member of the Lu tribe. His name is Lu Huai, and he has a lifespan of 300 years. Wei Zihong nodded. 300 years seemed to be a long time, but in fact, for the Bull Dragon tribe, it was just a human form. He said, "If I am willing to take him in as a disciple, what do you think, fellow Taoist Lu?" Lu Yin was startled and then revealed a hesitant expression. The clansmen he brought this time were all elites of the clan, and Lu Huai was even more outstanding among them. If he was carefully nurtured, he would very likely become a demon saint in the future. He was a little reluctant to give him away just like that. Moreover, if he joined the 9 continents mystical gate, he would have to abandon the power of Qi and blood and switch to the path of Qi. In this way, he might not be able to climb to such a peak. Apart from that, he was even more suspicious that Wei Zihong wanted to deliberately lose one of his clan's elites. However, he was afraid that if he disagreed, he would offend Wei Zihong, so he couldn't make up his mind. Lu Chujiao, who was sitting on the side, suddenly said, "We agree." Wei Zihong laughed and said, "Good. Then it's decided. No matter what the name of the competition is, Lu Huai will be accepted as my disciple." Lu Yin opened his mouth but couldn't refute. He was a little annoyed, so he turned around and transmitted his voice. "Chu Jiao, why did you give Lu Huai away? Do you know that if he stays in the clan, he will very likely become a great sage in the future?" Lu Chujiao said, "I'm also thinking for the clan. This spiritual master Wei is Zhang Shangzhen's direct disciple. If our clan can form a relationship with Zhang Shangzhen, it's a good thing that we can't ask for. Not to mention that Lu Huai isn't a great sage, we can even give him away." "What? He's Zhang Shangzhen's disciple?" Lu Yin was shocked. So this is the junior brother of Spiritual Master Lu and Spiritual Master Tian. He looked in Wei Zihong's direction and said with surprise and joy, "If that's the case, this is a fortunate thing." Wei Zihong had accepted a bull flood dragon as his disciple. He was also very satisfied. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, but after he had formed the heavenly abode. He could now read some of the ancient books and records of the Yao Yin clan that couldn't be flipped through in the past. Among them, there was a formation that could help the myriad origin transformation technique circulate and increase its power by a level. However, it needed the cooperation of 6 different types of flood dragons. This bull flood dragon was also a flood dragon, so his aptitude wasn't bad. That was why he wanted to accept him as his disciple. At this moment, there was another change below. On one of the peaks, a streak of sword light easily defeated its opponent. After a few rounds of victories, it saw that no one else came forward. It circled around in the sky a few times and actually aimed at the other peaks. If it saw that anyone was careless, it would not be able to do so. If it saw that someone was careless, it would immediately make a move and continuously strike them down. In the end, when some of the fighting disciples saw the beam of sword light turn around, they all retreated to the side as if they were facing a great enemy. Instead, they no longer paid attention to the opponent in front of them. Wei Zihong smiled and said, "This disciple's sword light is fast, so he should be from the branch of the Supreme Sword." He looked at Ran Xiushu and asked, "Is he Spiritual Master Ran's disciple?" Ran Xiushu coughed and called over a female disciple beside him. He said, "Yuning, come over here." The female disciple bowed and said, "Master, what orders do you have?" Ran Xiushu said with a stern expression, "Go and tell your junior sister not to be so stubborn and leave some face for her fellow Taoist. It's difficult for me as well." The female disciple widened her eyes and said, "Master, you and junior sister have agreed not to be restrained during fights of magical powers. You can't go back on your words." Ran Xiushu immediately revealed a helpless expression. She sighed and said, "Why are you in such a hurry? I'm just putting on a show of my dignity as a master. You could have just agreed to it. But now, I'm so embarrassed." The female disciple said fearfully, "It's me, it's not." Wei Zihong found it funny. However, the female disciple in the fight of magical powers was really not weak among her peers, especially her supreme sword ability. Even if one's cultivation was higher than hers, it would still be difficult to win. At this moment, the beam of sword light in the field saw that everyone was on guard and could not find an opponent, so it turned around and returned to the peak, revealing its figure. Everyone looked and saw that it was a girl about 14 or 15 years old. Her hair was combed into a flying fairy bun, and she was wearing a lotus green dress. Her facial features were delicate and pretty, and her eyes were beautiful. The round of sword light was like a small moon beside her. Although she did not attack anymore, after this incident, no one dared to use their full strength during the fight. They had to divide their attention to guard against this girl. This situation naturally attracted the attention of everyone in the hall. An elder walked behind Qi Yuntian and asked, "Perfected One, do you have any instructions?" Qi Yuntian said, "There's no need. The rules of magical powers did not state that one cannot fight on other peaks." At this moment, Gong Xianzhao suddenly said, "Then how are the winners and losers calculated?" Qi Yuntian looked at him and said, "If it's not on one's own peak, no matter how many people are defeated, it will not be counted as a victory. However, this disciple's sword technique is exquisite. Among all the disciples here today, there are very few who are her opponents. If anyone can fight her to a draw, there is no need to fight with others anymore. After 3 months, you can participate in the grand competition." Other than the perfected ones of the 9 provinces, the great mystic cultivators of the East Wilderness, the Lu clan of the South Luo clan, and the elder of the Heart Butterfly sect were all tempted when they heard this. They felt that it would not be easy to win against this swift sword light. However, if it was just a draw, they had a lot of confidence. Thus, all of them prepared to send their disciples to fight her. Gong Xianzhao called a clansman over and transmitted his voice. "Let Gongxin go forward and order him to put on a 5-layer Qi and Blood Taoist robe and use the spider heart pattern. There's no need to win. As long as he can fight to a draw with that Shaoqing female disciple, I will not hesitate to reward him with a noble title when I return." Chapter 1376. On the battle peak of the Heaven Patching Formation, a scarlet light turned, and a young mystic cultivator dressed in hemp robes walked up. This person looked calm and polite. He bowed according to the etiquette of the 9 continents and introduced himself. "I'm from the Gong family, Gong Xing. Greetings, fellow Taoist." The Shaoqing female disciple bowed and replied with a crisp voice, "Shaoqing disciple, Yuxinlan. Greetings, fellow Taoist." Gong Xing raised his head and said calmly, "Please enlighten me, fellow Taoist." Yuxinlan retreated a little before she raised her wrist, and a sword light flashed by her side before it slashed down. However, when it struck Gong Xing's body, a layer of bloody light floated up from his body, and it seemed like a tough membrane that wasn't penetrated. Yuxinlan's expression was calm. The supreme sword was not a killing sword, so it was not strange for it to be blocked. She guided her dermic powers, and the sword light started spinning outside. It was sometimes fast and sometimes slow, and there was a faint sharpness in it, as if it could fall at any time. Numerous battles in the past had proven that under such coercion, the person being targeted had to maintain full concentration and only hope to not reveal any flaws. Even if one's strength was tyrannical and could disregard all of this, when faced with the extreme sword escape light, if one didn't possess a movement technique that was fast enough, there was nothing one could do to her. Gong Xian was also unable to break through it. However, he had another way to deal with it. His blood and qi surged, and in just a breath's time, the blood light around him swelled up. Then, as if it had exploded, it turned into a faint red mist that floated around his body. At the same time, he closed his eyes. Before coming to the battle, he had done some deep research on the various cultivation techniques of the 9 continents. The supreme sword was extremely fast. Even if he used a divine ability with his eyes, he might not be able to capture its traces. Thus, he did not look at it, but purely relied on the ripples of qi and blood outside his body to sense it. Yuxinlan observed seriously for a while. As a Shaoqing disciple, she would not underestimate any opponent. Moreover, there were many things in this world that could restrain the sword pill. After seeing it, she was sure that her opponent did not set up any impressive tricks. She extended her slender finger and tapped on the sword pill. In an instant, the sword light split into 8, striking down from different directions. Every sword cultivator knew how to use the light-splitting sword, but it was not as common as the disciples who specialized in the sword transformation technique. With this one move, he could destroy most of the traps set up against sword cultivators. Gong Xian didn't make a sound. His blood and qi surged, and a web of blood and qi threads flew out. The oncoming attacks were continuously destroyed by the sword lights. But it did not stop growing. Yushen's eyes flashed as he continued to launch sneak attacks with his sword. She knew that the mystic cultivators practiced the qi and blood Tao, and their emotions were easily agitated. In front of all the heroes in the world, if they were forced to the point where they could not fight back, then they would be very likely to be impatient and reveal their flaws. Gong Xian, on the other hand, was exceptionally calm. Among all the Gong family people who were sent to fight this time, he could be counted as one of the most powerful ones. He might not be number one, but he had a strong temperament, and his tenacity and endurance were extremely strong. No matter how unfavorable the situation was for him, and no matter how many people looked at him with disdain, he just stood there and did not move. He did not care about anything else and fought for a draw. Everyone in the hall was also watching this battle intently, as if they were very interested in it. At their level, it was impossible. They didn't care about how the two fought, what strategy they used, or who won or lost. What they really paid attention to now was the qi and blood pattern that could block the slashes of the flying swords. Especially the cultivators of the 9 states. They did not reject these things that could increase their strength. Instead, they were happy to accept them. Previously, they had sent many disciples to practice the qi and blood pattern, trying to understand its wonders. They wanted to see if it could be combined with other methods. With their eyesight, it was not difficult to see that Gong Xian had a few more layers of patterned skin membranes on his body, which was why he could block the flying swords. Many people were already thinking about whether they could use this method on themselves to increase their strength. Naturally, when the spiritual master of the heavenly abode used his dharma, he would be thousands of miles away. He didn't need to wear any membranes, but he could use the qi and blood of the demons to draw the pattern in advance to trap and block the enemy. That was equivalent to having an artifact out of thin air. When Tao Zhenren saw the changes in the pattern, a thoughtful look appeared on his face. Just now, seeing this thing, he suddenly had an idea. If he could do it, it would undoubtedly be of great help to increase the strength of the cultivators of the 9 states. In the Junqian realm, Sima Quan waited for a month, but there was still no news from Wanderer Rao. However, he knew that the Dragon Sovereign lived in the Wildlands Heaven Domain and the Qi Accumulation Palace were very far away. Even if he left immediately, he would not be able to reach there in a short period of time. What he was waiting for now was news from the Qi Accumulation Palace. As the true sovereign of the palace, if he wanted to invade the mountain and sea realm, then he would definitely be called upon. If they chose to continue the war against Yuliangism, he could be considered to be at the forefront, so he should be the first to know the attitude of the palace. A few days later, there was a fluctuation of spiritual light in the star pool. Sima Quan's eyes opened, and he knew that the messenger had come. The light in the pool gradually surged, and a Taoist with thick eyebrows and big eyes appeared. He raised his hand and said, "Fellow Taoist Quan Ming, greetings." Sima Quan politely returned the greeting and said, "True Sovereign Hu, greetings." After being conferred the title of True Sovereign, he had not only made friends with Wanderer Rao in the Qi Accumulation Palace, but also made friends with many true sovereigns. He hoped that if there were any changes in the palace, he would be able to be informed as soon as possible. Now, it was proven that he had made the right move. True Sovereign Hu said, "Fellow Taoist, you have been alone outside, and you have been unable to communicate with the outside world. I'm afraid you must be anxious from waiting." Sima Quan sighed and said, "Indeed." True Sovereign Hu nodded. At their level, status and power were all external things. Cultivation was the foundation. Sima Quan's magic power and divine ability were not weak, so he was willing to divulge some information that was not too important to him. At the same time, he would do him a favor. If he planted some good karma now, who knew if he could help him in the future? He was a straightforward person, so he did not beat around the bush and told him about the Dragon Sovereign being jointly attacked by the two factions. Sima Quan already knew about this, but he still pretended to be shocked. However, he knew that in the past month, True Sovereign Hu had brought more than just this bit of news. As expected, he heard True Sovereign Hu continue, "Fellow Taoist Quan Ming, you don't know, but before Palace Master Yang returned, the palace is in a mess. Now, there are two sides arguing endlessly. One side thinks that there is no benefit for the Qi accumulation palace to continue fighting with Yuliangism, and that it is better to stop fighting and divide the Middle Heaven regions. The other side thinks that they should fight with Yuliangism to the end, and not retreat at all. Sima Quan nodded to himself. He already understood that the one who caused this argument was actually Yang Chuan himself. After this person joined forces with Kong Ying, the people below did not understand what he was thinking. They were afraid that he would make a choice that would conflict with their own interests, so they all expressed their own opinions. This was a good thing for him. It meant that Yang Chuan did not have the intention of joining forces with the two factions before this. Dealing with the Dragon Sovereign was just to get rid of the threats around him, but it was hard to say what would happen next. After True Sovereign who finished speaking, he asked casually, "I wonder what fellow Taoist Quan Ming thinks about this?" Sima Quan knew that True Sovereign who was not from the Qi accumulation palace. After his original sect was exterminated by Yuliangism, he had no choice but to rely on them. There were many people like this in the Qi accumulation palace. He thought for a moment and said, even if Yuliangism is willing to back down, how can it let go of the thousands of sects it destroyed so easily? True Sovereign who was very satisfied with his answer and said, "Fellow Taoist Quan Ming, don't worry. If there are any changes in the palace, I will inform you immediately." Sima Quan bowed and waited for the light to dissipate. He pondered for a moment in the room and made up his mind. Looks like I have to do this. Although it will expose the strength of my sect in advance, and if I am unlucky, I might expose myself. But if I arrange it well, it is not impossible to avoid. The current situation was not something he could turn around, but it did not mean that he could not make some small moves. Especially at this time, it was time to show off his heavenly demon methods. Most of the followers of Yuliangism had the knowledge jade. If Kong Yin wanted to, he would be able to know almost every disciple's actions. This would be very restrictive to the disciples of the sect, but there were also many benefits. For example, heavenly demons like Sima Quan did not dare to hide their demonic thoughts into the disciples of the sect, for fear of attracting Kong Yin's attention. However, in such a big sect, there would always be one or two who would rather endure the strict rules than swallow the knowledge jade. This was especially true for true monarchs. One of the two true monarchs of Yuliangism who fought with him did not do so, which gave him a chance. When they fought, he secretly infected them with demonic qi. However, he kept it hidden and was prepared to use it at the crucial moment. But now that the situation had changed, he had no choice but to use it in advance. Although the two heaven regions were close to each other, he wasn't able to use his spiritual power from such a long distance. Thus, he went out and used the spiritual boat to fly. After a month, he arrived near the third star heaven region. When he arrived here, he immediately turned invisible and passed through the spell formation. Not long after, he was able to sense that strand of devilish intent. Then he stealthily activated it. After a few more days, there was a fluctuation of spiritual light. Then, a palace flew out and a flying boat rose into the sky, flying towards the direction of the jade boat heavens. Sima Quan smiled deeply. This was what he had been waiting for. He used the demonic thoughts to trigger this person's killing desire and called him to fight with him. With the demonic poison in his body, it would not be difficult for him to defeat him. Then, he would find a way to counterattack into the three heavens and completely occupy this place. After that, he would use the excuse of controlling the situation to order the killing of all the disciples of Yuliangism who swallowed the knowledge jade. It should be known that although the two sects had been fighting non-stop, the casualties were all caused in the battle. There was no such thing as shedding all pretense of cordiality. However, if he did this, it would be equivalent to completely forming a grudge. At least, before the two sects settled this matter, there was no possibility of reconciliation. Of course, there was another way, which was to hand him over. However, the possibility of this was very small. The Qi accumulation palace was now a place where all the forces had no choice but to gather. If Yang Chuan dared to do this, he would definitely lose the morale of the people. Then, how could he fight against Yuliangism? He smiled coldly and looked at the flying palace. Then, he turned into a gust of cold wind and secretly followed. Chapter 1377. The Qi Accumulation Palace's great imperial executive, Jiang Kan, was sitting behind a long table, reading a talisman letter. His Taoist robe was simple and tidy, and his Taoist bun was untied. His looks were above average, but as he sat there, his eyes shone brightly. Above his head, there were dragons and tigers roaring. 2 streams of qi swirled and enveloped the hall, giving off an inviolable aura. At this moment, the person closest to him in the hall was 200 feet away. Not only was he afraid of his aura, but he was also afraid of being sucked into the qi whirlpool. This was not because he could not suppress the qi in his body, but because he was extremely powerful, so he did it on purpose. In the Qi Accumulation Palace, his cultivation was second only to Yang Chuan, but different from the latter, he was very aggressive and had always been very tough on Yuliangism. If not for Yang Chuan's order to deal with the Dragon Sovereign not to cause trouble in the next few years, the situation between the two families would not be as stable as it was now. At this moment, he finished reading the talisman letter in his hand and threw it down, saying, "This letter says that a few days ago, Chuanxing True Lord, who was appointed by the palace, took over the Sanshan heavenly domain and killed all the disciples of Yuliangism who swallowed the jade of knowledge. What does everyone think?" As soon as he said this, there was a flurry of discussion. Many people looked shocked. A palace executive True Lord stood up, bowed to the seat, and said, "This person is too ruthless. Yuliangism will definitely remember this. In the future, if our disciples fall into his hands, they will not have a good ending." That's what Wang Zhenjuan thinks. Jiang Kan looked around and said, "Then what do you all think?" Seeing that no one spoke, he said coldly, "I think he killed well, but he did not kill enough. This way, the palace lord will not be hesitant when he comes back." The expression of the executive True Lord who spoke earlier changed slightly. Jiang Kan looked at him and said, "Wang True Lord still dares to speak the truth. It's funny that many people don't even dare to speak the truth. With such cowardice, it's no wonder he doesn't dare to fight against Yuliangism." Everyone present was a little embarrassed by his words. One of the true monarchs thought about it and bowed. "Imperial Commander, since true monarch Chuanxing has taken over Sanshan Heaven region, he will be attacked by Yuliangism soon. Should we send someone to help?" Jiang Kan said coldly, "Since he has done such a thing, he should resolve it himself. The palace will not indulge him." The True Lord participating duty was stunned. He had thought that Jiang Kan would approve of his actions and send reinforcements, but he didn't expect that Jiang Kan would ignore him. Jiang Kan said, "It's not that I don't care about his feelings, but the palace has given strict orders that he only needs to guard the heavenly region and not move without reason. Even if Yuliangism invades, he can just fight back. Who ordered him to attack 3 morning heavenly region? If it wasn't for the fact that I considered him a meritorious deed, I would have punished him." Someone else stood up and bowed. "Imperial Commander, recently, many Yuliangism disciples have come to invade our heavenly region. It must have something to do with this. Should we continue to guard the array door or fight our way out?" Jiang Kan said coldly, "When the palace master left, he made an agreement with Yuliangism. Before they return, neither side can act rashly. But since Yuliangism doesn't follow the rules first, we won't be polite either. Send an order to all heavenly regions. There's no need to abide by the previous order and just attack." Meanwhile, Sima Quan had broken into the 3 morning heavenly region. First, he killed all the Yuliangism disciples who had consumed the jade of knowledge. Then, he used a divine ability to destroy the spiritual opportunity of the Earth's star veins. That way, if anyone wanted to stay here again, they would have to pay a huge price to reorganize their spiritual opportunity. After that, he took the remaining people back to Jadeship Heaven region. A few days later, he received news from True Lord Hu. Jiang Kan was very pleased with what he had done, but also disliked him for not following orders. If Yuliangism invaded, the palace would not send any help. He could only rely on his own power to fight against Yuliangism, and he was told to be careful. When Sima Quan heard this, he chuckled. He had never expected help from the palace. His original goal had been to provoke a fight between the two sects, and buy more time for the mountain and sea realm. Now that he had achieved his goal, he didn't need to worry about anything else. According to his calculations, Yuliangism would attack soon, and he wouldn't be able to hold them off. Therefore, he would need to use the mooring arc to escape to the wild, desolate heaven region. When Wanderer Rao returned, he would join him. Then, as long as Kong In didn't come after him, he would have nothing to fear. In a few days, the final competition would begin in the mountain and sea realm. This time, the Qinsong school had only sent one person to fight. His name was Yin Heyao, a first-stage Yuanian cultivator who had been cultivating the Tao for 300 years. In terms of seniority, he was a sixth-generation disciple of Meng Zhen and the only cultivator that the Qinsong school had sent to fight. The sects of the 9 continents had long since come to a tacit understanding. This time, they would use this opportunity to unify the various powers and pave the way for the future battle against the Junqian realm. The first-place reward was just to attract the powers of the various regions to come here. It was a disguised form of support and benefits. Therefore, the sects would make some concessions, and after entering the top 30, they would stop. If they didn't do so, it would most likely turn into a fight between the sects of the 9 continents. Perhaps in the future competition, the disciples sent by the various regions would be able to force the sects of the 9 continents to bring out their true strength. But right now, there was no need to do so. Otherwise, the next time someone came to participate, they wouldn't be so willing. At this moment, within the Heaven Mending Formation Pavilion, the people from the various regions were cultivating. All of a sudden, everyone's bodies trembled as they sensed a strange movement in the sky. They couldn't help but look up. Up in the sky, there was a rumbling sound, and a gap opened up. They couldn't help but be moved. It was obvious that someone had come from beyond the heavens. Now, in the various regions, those who had reached a certain level of cultivation knew that the Junqian realm was about to invade. These people couldn't help but reveal vigilance, and the blood in their bodies also stirred. But after a moment, they heard Qi Yuntian's loud voice. "Everyone, don't panic. This is not someone else. It is my teacher, Meng Zhen, who has returned from beyond the heavens." When everyone heard this, they knew that it was a false alarm. All of them retracted the surging blood in their bodies, and the palaces on the formation diagram also retracted their light, gradually returning to their original appearance. Qi Yuntian walked out of the hall and came to the empty space in front of the hall. When the clear light descended from the heavens, he went forward and bowed. "Disciple greets teacher." Meng Zhen scattered the light around his body and nodded slightly. "Yunan, how is the situation in the 9 continents?" Qi Yuntian said, "After teacher left, there hasn't been much change in the 9 continents. But not long ago, cultivators from the Junqian realm came to investigate the situation of the 9 continents." Meng Zhen's expression turned solemn. The arrival of people from the Junqian realm was clearly a prelude to their plans for the mountain and sea realm. But he also knew that since the sect knew about this, it should have been smoothly resolved. He said, "Master needs to go and greet the sect master first. When I return, Yuntian, you can tell me the details." With that, he turned into a clear light and came to the front of the main hall. Without needing to be announced, he was invited in. When he entered the room, he clasped his hands to Sect Master Qin. "Disciple greets the Sect Master." Sect Master Qin said warmly, "Sit down and talk." Meng Zhen clasped his hands and sat down at the side. Sect Master Qin said, "Jida, you left a message to go beyond the heavens to look for other realms. You've been gone for almost 60 years, and there hasn't been any news from you. Now that you've returned safely, I can rest assured." Taoist Master Meng cupped his hands and said, "Disciple is ashamed to have troubled Master's concern. This time, I originally wanted to find a realm for my 9 continents as a path of retreat. It's just that this trip is slightly lacking in luck. I've wasted dozens of years for nothing, yet I've gained nothing." Sect Master Qin said, "It's not easy to find a suitable realm in the Void Essence Sea. If I can find it, it's the luck of the 9 continents. If I can't find it, there's no need to worry." Meng Zhen said yes. Sect Master Qin said, "What do you plan to do when you come down?" Meng Zhen said, "Disciple wants to cultivate for a period of time. After my cultivation improves a little, I'll go to explore beyond the heavens. Even though he had gone beyond the heavens for a long time, he had brought a lot of spiritual vigor with him, so his cultivation did not fall behind much. But the Void Essence Sea was not a place for cultivation after all, and there were all kinds of ferocious beasts, so it was not as safe as the inner realm. Sect Master Qin smiled and said, "Did you see the evil realm on this trip?" Mengjin replied, "I saw a few, but it's filled with poisonous gas, so it's hard to survive. I brought a few Two Realms dial with me on this trip, and I threw one into it. It's just a tentative attempt, and maybe I'll gain something in the future." The so-called evil realm was created after the world was created. Due to the imbalance of yin and yang were in a stalemate, and all kinds of qi were in chaos. No living beings could be born in that realm, and even ordinary cultivators could not stay there for long. In fact, most of the worlds were like this. If a realm like that could calm the chaos, it might be able to separate the turbid from the turbid and stabilize the 5 elements. But that would usually take millions and millions of years to calculate, and it would be useless in the current situation. Sect leader Qin said, "More than 20 years ago, we found an ancient cultivator's palace in our world. After Du Junhal Master searched for it, he brought back an item from that place. Later on, I carefully examined it and confirmed that this item was the Yuan Tian Qi that the previous sect leader mentioned. When this item is thrown into the evil realm, it can sort out the 2 qis, regulate the 5 elements, and open up a good place to live in." Mengjin said in surprise, "There's actually such a good item?" Sect leader Qin said, "This object was created by an almighty cultivator using precious materials of heaven and earth to refine. The price paid for it was enormous. Presumably, it was intended to be used in the fiendish realm. However, before it could do so, it perished in the mountain and sea realm." Mengjin said thoughtfully, "If such an item existed, then even the evil realm could become a place for cultivators to live. I wonder how effective it would be?" Sect Master Qin smiled. "Of course it would be limited. At most, it would be able to open up an area of about 10,000 square miles. But it would be enough to use as a path of retreat. The only problem is that once the item is set up, it would require a person to stand guard there, constantly using magical power to control it. This is a difficult task. Since you intend to go to the outer world in the future, would you be willing to take charge of this?" Mengjin cupped his hands and said with a serious expression, "Disciple is willing to go." Chapter 1378. A few days later, in the Skymending Formation Map competition, the 100 nations of Eastern Wasteland won first place as they wished. However, the winner was not a member of the Gong family, but a disciple from the Xinfang nation of the Mo family. Qi Yuntian bestowed the dragon demon that was still in deep slumber on the spot. However, this kind of fierce demon had a huge appetite. If he wanted to raise it to the level of the demon ancestor, he didn't know how much blood medicine he had to feed it. Just the power of one country was not enough to raise it. Only the power of 100 countries could do it. From this aspect, no matter which nation won, the result would be the same. This time, all the disciples who showed up in the competition were more or less rewarded. The top 30 were especially generous, and they wished they could compete again right away. Lu Xiujiao and Lu Yin were on their way back to the 100th southern continent. Lu Yin was upset and said, "Just a little bit more, really just a little bit more, and our Lu family's disciple would have won first place. Why did Eastern Wasteland have to take advantage of us?" Lu Xiujiao said, "Don't complain. This might not be a bad thing." Lu Yin's expression changed and he looked over. "Chu Jiao, what do you mean?" Lu Xiujiao said in a muffled voice, "Heart Butterfly tribe has a sleeping demonic ancestor, the 9 continents have several supreme masters, and our Lu family has an ancestor. Only Eastern Wasteland doesn't have a demonic ancestor. Therefore, they are the most suitable to get this demonic dragon. If we got it, we probably wouldn't have enough blood medicine to offer, and in the end, we would only get a demonic beast saint. It wouldn't be a benefit, but a burden. Now that we got third place, the reward is not bad." Lu Xiujiao thought of the huge amount of blood medicine his ancestor had swallowed when he wasn't sleeping, and he couldn't help but shiver. He said, "Indeed, but I still don't want to lose to Eastern Wasteland." Lu Tsujiao said, "This isn't the only time. If we lose this time, we can just win it back next time. Why bother about what happened in the past?" Lu Tsujiao pondered and agreed, "That's true." He clenched his fists and made up his mind, "If there is a next time, I will win it back no matter what." In the upper extreme hall, Qi Yuntian was flipping through the reports that had been delivered to him. Although the people from the various regions had left one by one in the past month, there were still many matters that required his attention. Guan Yingyue stepped into the main hall and stood in front of the table. "Honored Master, this disciple just now," he said. "In order to entertain the envoys and their subordinates, this disciple has used up a lot of blood medicine this time. 60% of the blood medicine obtained from the Sky Demon has been used up. In addition to the previous consumption, there is not much left. Because we still need to maintain the distribution of the various departments, I'm afraid it will only last for a few years." Qi Yuntian didn't care at all. "It doesn't matter. There are countless demons in the northern land, and things are progressing smoothly. With the Heavenly Ghost tribe at my beck and call, it won't be long before the treasury is filled." Guan Yingyue grunted in response, then produced a jade slip from his sleeve and placed it on the table. "This is a concocting technique sent by True Monarch Gua," he said. "I'll use it to exchange for a piece of land to establish the Taoist teachings and doctrines of the Bright Treasure Palace in the Mountain and Sea Realm." Qi Yuntian put down the letter and said, "True Monarch Gua is a cultivator of the Great Dust Realm, but he revealed the situation of the Great Dust Realm to the 9 continents in time, so I was prepared for it. He has also made a great contribution, so I should treat him generously. Do you know where he wants to establish his sect?" Guan Yingyue said, "True Monarch Gua wants the turbid azure sky." Qi Yuntian thought for a moment, then said, "Later, you can tell True Monarch Gua that although the turbid azure sky is peaceful and there are no battles, it is now under the control of the 2 disciples of Hall Master Du Zhen. If he insists on establishing his sect here, he will have to wait for Hall Master Du Zhen to come out of seclusion. If he is unwilling, I can grant him a piece of land near the East Sea." With a wave of his hand, mountains, rivers, water, and land appeared on the table. There was a place in the southeast that was especially eye-catching. There were over 100 mountain peaks, and among them, there was a piece of land that protruded into the sea and scattered into a few islands. There was also a fire vent on one of the big islands, which was a suitable place to build the heavenly furnace of earth fire. Guan Yingyue took a look. This place was surrounded by the forces of various sects, and the bigger demons and monsters were already wiped out. Moreover, it was surrounded by plains and forests. There were no high mountains or dangerous swamps, so it seemed to be very safe. But at the same time, if there were any changes, the sects of the 9 continents would be able to react in time. He said, "True Monarch Gua is not someone who doesn't know when to advance or retreat. I think he should know what to choose." Guochanghe mentioned the turbid azure sky, which was like bargaining, purposely raising a high price and then taking a step back. It would not be too low. He could see this kind of method, so he felt that the person should be very satisfied with this piece of land with abundant spiritual vigor. Qi Yuntian reached out and picked up the jade scroll, and after scanning it with his consciousness, he saw that there was no problem, so he passed it to the disciple standing at the side and said, "Send it to the Jingluo yard, only the direct disciples of the Dong Tian can read it." The disciple bowed and left with the jade scroll. Qi Yuntian then said, "I heard that you have accepted a disciple recently?" Guan Yingyue said, "Yes, but he is a registered disciple." Qi Yuntian was the next headmaster of Qinsong School, and Guan Yingyue was his first disciple, so naturally, he could not make the decision to accept a disciple alone. However, there was no problem for registered disciples, such as Meng Zhen. Before he accepted Qi Yuntian, he already had many registered disciples. Even Qi Yuntian himself had a few registered disciples before he accepted Guan Yingyue, and it was very necessary, in case he had no subordinates to use when he needed to do something in the future. Qi Yuntian asked, "Where is this disciple from?" Guan Yingyue said, "He is a citizen of the 9 cities of Qinsong School." That day, I was ordered by my master to inspect the competition, and coincidentally, a disciple made a mistake, and his instrument was thrown out of the fighting ring. The onlookers all retreated in panic, only a young man stood still. I saw that he had a good temperament, so I wanted to accept him as my disciple. This competition was not only for the Yuanning cultivators, but also for the low-level disciples from various regions. It was just that their cultivation was too low, and they were not worthy of the attention of cultivators at the level of the Dongtian master. Qi Yuntian nodded and said, I heard that Zhu Yi has raised a lot of insects recently, as the eldest senior brother. Do you know about this? Guan Yingyue did not dare to hide anything. He bowed and said, Master, the last time I went to the East Baron, I happened to see a group of insects besieging a palace. I thought that if these insects were used well, they would be a great help, so I brought some back to raise them. I thought it was just a small matter, so I did not report it to my master. Please punish me, master. Qi Yuntian said, My Yutsong sect is open to all. We don't mind our disciples cultivating outside of the sect, and we never said that we can't raise insect demons. Go back and tell him that he can take it out openly. There's no need to hide it. Guan Yingyue was happy for his junior brother. He said, Yes, disciple thanks master on behalf of the other junior brothers. Qi Yuntian stood up, waved his sleeve, and the original land of the 9 states appeared in front of him. He looked at it for a while, then slowly said, Yingyue, what do you think of the top 10 disciple system? Guan Yingyue bowed and said, Master, disciples' words do not carry much weight, I dare not say anything. Qi Yuntian said, Just a few words, it is not a big deal. Guan Yingyue said loudly, The top 10 disciple system was established by the 4th generation sect leader, but it only applies to the 9 states. Now that we are in the mountain and sea realm, the world has changed, and disciple thinks that the structure has become small. Qi Yuntian showed a look of praise. He nodded and said, You are right, the number of Taoist paradises in our Qinsong school is not comparable to the number in the 9 states. Even the 9 halls have expanded again and again. It is time to change the rules. Guan Yingyue's heart moved. If the structure of the top 10 disciple system changed, then the lower hall would follow, and if it went one step further, there would be changes in the Qinsong school from the 3 halls below. This was not a small matter, and it was very likely that all the Taoists in the school would be involved. But at this time, the school had not been established for a long time, and although the foundation was solid, there were still many rules that were not fixed. It was a good time to change. If they missed this opportunity, it would be even more difficult in a few hundred years, and it would take even longer. At this time, a disciple came in and reported to the Taoist, The Fangchen court has sent news that the spiritual boat for Meng Zhen has been built. Qi Yuntian said, That's fast. Fangchen Yard has put in a lot of effort this time. Send the spirit boat to Master and reward Master Huang with 100 spirit elixirs, 3 Shen Hui robes, and a profound artifact. After the disciple left, Qi Yuntian said to Guan Yingyue, Yingyue, go on my behalf and invite Hall Master Hua, Hall Master Du, and the left and right Hall Masters of the Duzhen Hall. Tell them I have something to discuss with them. Guan Yingyue's expression turned solemn. He said, Yes, disciple will go now. After the region's competition, the various powers returned to their own territories. For a time, except for the Shaoqing and Qinsong sects, who were still expanding towards the west and north, the mountain and sea realm was once again peaceful. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, 30 years had passed. Inside the Duzhen Hall, there was a rumble. Zhang Yan opened his eyes and waved his sleeve. With just a wave of magic power, the restrictions outside were shattered. Although they were slowly mending, it was clear that the process was much slower because of the magic power. He nodded. The more barriers a cultivator broke through, the more tyrannical his magic power would be. At this moment, he had already smoothly broken through the 11th barrier. Compared to the 10th barrier, his magic power was much more powerful. Even the restrictions of the main hall that could block the attacks of ordinary true weapons could be casually blasted apart by him. At this point, he did not plan to stop, but wanted to break through the next barrier. Now that the sect leader was in charge, there was no need for him to take care of matters outside. Therefore, after a few days of rest, he would sit down and circulate the magic power. He went into secluded meditation for another 70 years. One day, the hall suddenly shone brightly, and then a 5-colored light spread out. Not even the restrictive spell formation could block it. In the outer halls of the Duzhen Hall, the elders who were cultivating in their huts sensed the abnormality and involuntarily awoke from their meditation. Zhang Yan raised his eyes to look into the distance while the Taoist robe on his body swayed lightly. The 12th barrier had been soundlessly broken through by him. At this point, his magic power had stopped rising, and it wasn't like before where it would increase greatly with every breakthrough. It had become mixed and fused into one, so it seemed to be completely still instead. If he wanted to, he could refine a nascent core at any time and step into the 3rd stage of the elephant phase realm. Chapter 1379. Zhang Yan's gaze landed on the hall. There was only a small portion of the jade stone coral left. With his current spiritual energy, if he continued to use this item to cultivate, it would completely disappear when he reached the mortal shedding realm. However, he didn't need this item to refine the embryo. Thus, he waved his sleeves and a ray of light flew over. The light wrapped around it and sent it to the back of the hall. The yuan in the embryo was the meaning of the beginning of one's origin. When a cultivator reached this step, it was like they were reincarnated from the beginning. They gave up death and entered life. The use of their physical body had reached its end. If they wanted to continue, they would have to break the shackles and shed their mortal body. However, the human body was a boat to cross the world. If they were to get rid of the old, they would be killing themselves. Thus, they had to leave death and enter life. When yin and yang were not moving, they had to combine their essence, energy, and spirit into one. Then, they would be able to refine the qi of origin. This qi of origin was the foundation of getting rid of the shackles. It was something that no medicine or pill could compare to. However, it couldn't be contaminated by the qi outside of the body. Thus, it had to be stored in one's own grotto heaven. Then one could refine the qi of heaven and earth. The embryo, here was the foundation of the future path. Everything went in from here and everything came out from here. The heaven and earth here wasn't referring to the universe outside of the body. It was referring to the world inside the body. If a cultivator made a mistake during this process, they would fall into silence and never wake up again. It was no different from death. However, this stage wasn't difficult. According to historical records, none of the cultivators who cultivated to this level had failed at this stage. Even so, Zhang Yan wouldn't be careless. He called out and a ray of light flew out. It was the mountain river drawing. It spun around and turned into a boy. He bowed and said, "Greetings, master." Zhang Yan said, "I need to refine the embryo today. The grotto heaven can't contain external objects. You can guard the back of the hall. Once I'm done, you can come back." Child of mountain and river bowed and said, "Yes, child." After he finished speaking, his figure moved and turned into a ray of light, heading toward the back of the palace. Zhang Yan adjusted his qi and sat up straight again. Soon he entered a meditative state. With the circulation of the technique, his mind and spiritual power gradually merged together. After an unknown amount of time, in that extremely quiet void, a surge of vitality suddenly appeared. This was the first origin qi. Under his deliberate guidance, the moment this origin qi appeared, it was smoothly sent into the grotto heaven. Once it landed in the grotto heaven, a bright light gradually shone out from the chaos. It opened up a space, and it seemed to be in the same place as the previous world, but at the same time, it wasn't in the same place as the previous world. At the same time, his body trembled slightly. His mana involuntarily flowed between him and the void space as if it was endless. After reaching this step, he was already a nascent soul cultivator. Not long after, another strand of vital energy was refined, similarly flowing in. However, it did not merge with the previous strand of vital energy, similarly forming a world of its own. Following the strands of vital energy, inside the grotto heaven, 12 layers of heaven rose one after another, and each of them connected to the same place. Before he started cultivating, he had already read the records left by the ancestors of Chinsong school, so he was not surprised by this. This situation was actually related to the barrier that the cultivator broke through before. Normally speaking, after a cultivator broke through 6 barriers, he would have a strong enough foundation and could refine the first origin chi. This way, he could smoothly open up 6 layers of heaven. However, he broke through 12 barriers, so naturally, 12 layers of heaven were born. He could faintly sense that he had already reached his limit in this trial. Even if there was someone in this world with greater fa than him in this trial, that person would have no choice but to stop here. As he continued, although the first origin chi continued to fall into this place, it was no longer creating a new world. Instead, it continued to nourish and strengthen the 12 layers of heaven. At this moment, with a thought, mighty power surged out from the 12 layers of heaven. 12 streams of clear energy rose from his body. If he was willing, each stream of clear energy could gather into a clone. If he released them all at once, he could fight against 12 grotto heavens at the same time. Moreover, each of them could be considered his dharma body. If he did not destroy all of them, he would not be able to kill him. Even if one of them was killed, as long as the 12 layers of heaven were still there, he could use them again after some time. This was the true strength of a venerable nascent embryo. However, every time he released the clone, it was the same as drawing the vital energy from the nascent embryo. This would slow down his cultivation. If it was not necessary, he would not do this. Fortunately, he had already reached the 6th transformation of strength path. Even if he encountered danger, he did not need to use it to fight. Thus, he recalled all the clones with a thought. At this stage, as long as he continued to cultivate and obtain the root fruit, he would be able to achieve the chi path mortal shedding. As the saying goes, 1 gives birth to 2, 2 gives birth to 3, and 3 gives birth to all things. The root fruit of cultivators was that 1, which came from the nascent embryo. Once it was found, he would be able to break free from the original space and form his own world. He would be able to fly away at any time and would not be injured by the Xiantian chaotic destruction vitality light. However, this step could not be completed in one go. There were many things to pay attention to. Since ancient times, there were many people who cultivated the nascent embryo, but not all of them could achieve the mortal shedding. This was also the reason. Zhang Yan was clear that he was just now, there was no rush to advance. He could still accumulate for a period of time. Thus, he stood up, pushed open the door and walked out. In Junchen world, Sima Quan sat on the Mo ship and had been floating in the void for close to 100 years. Just as he had predicted, Yuliangism immediately took action after he returned to Jade Ship Heaven region. That time, 5 perfected monarchs came. He knew that he could not stop them, so he used the formation to fight for a while before flying away. Not to mention his own escape technique, he also had the ship. The 5 perfected monarchs couldn't catch him. After chasing for a while, they all gave up. However, the various heaven regions still surrounded him, so he couldn't stay for long everywhere he went. Even some of the savage heaven regions were found by the Yuliang cult. In the end, he could only follow the directions of the docked ship. As for the disciples, to preserve their strength and not let them get hurt for nothing, they dispersed before Yuliangism arrived. It was difficult to gather people's hearts, it was easy to disperse them. If it was a normal sect, they would not dare to do this. However, he had planted a demonic poison in every disciple. With a thought, he could make them listen to his orders, so he did not care about this. He did not return to the Aura Accumulation Palace. First, he was afraid that Yuliangism would send people to ambush him on the way. Second, he was afraid that if he lost the Jade Ship Heaven region, he would be punished by the palace. Although he was a perfected monarch, they would not do anything to him in the end. However, he would most likely be restricted for a period of time, and he would not be able to do anything. He would not even be able to contact the mountain and sea realm. Therefore, he would rather wander outside and wait for the right time to return. As he moved forward, he suddenly felt an indescribable will envelop him. His heart stirred, and he followed the will to turn the Mo ship and head toward a realm. It took him more than 100 days to find an Earth star that was different from the one he was in. Before he even got close to it, he could feel a turbid spiritual vigor permeating the surroundings. It was obvious that there was an Earth Chi-Meng ring set up here. His gaze swept back and forth, and he saw that at the peak of the tallest mountain on the continent, there was an upside-down mountain that was facing the void sky. It had been flattened by someone's magic power, forming a spacious platform, and on top of it was a palace. Sanren Rao stood in front of the palace, and there was another person standing behind him. Based on his aura, he should be a cultivator from the devil sect of this realm. Sima Quan put away the Mo ship in the sky, then turned into a beam of light and landed on the ground. He took a few steps forward and cupped his hands. Sanren Rao, were you waiting for me? I'm sorry. Rao Sanren laughed and said, how could I not? If you didn't remind me, I wouldn't have been able to collect the legacy left behind by that old dragon. From this point of view, I owe you a favor. He took a step to the side and pointed at the person behind him. This is true Lord Deng. So you're like me, serving under that dragon monarch. True Lord Deng said in a self-mocking tone, that old dragon only trusts his dragon children and grandchildren. People like me can only watch over his house. Sima Quan came forward and cupped his hands. True Lord Deng, you're too kind. True Lord Deng didn't dare to be arrogant, so he returned the greeting. He knew that aside from the fact that this mystique was not weak, he also had a huge force under him. If one were to talk about how important he was to Sanren Rao, in Sanren Rao's heart, he was much more important than him. Sima Quan asked, may I ask Sanren Rao, where is this place? Sanren Rao had gained a lot this time, and now saw Sima Quan as one of his own, so he didn't hide anything from him. He said, this is one of the lairs managed by that old dragon. He spent a lot of effort to set up restrictions to conceal it. Now that it's in our hands, no matter how fierce the battle between the Qi Accumulation Palace and Yuliangism is, it won't reach this place. Sima Quan said, I've been traveling in the void for more than 10 years. What's the situation now? Sanren Rao said, whether it's Yang Chuan or Kong Ing, they've all suffered great losses in the battle. Until now, they haven't shown themselves. Sima Quan was shocked. With Kong Ing and Yang Chuan's abilities, there's still not a match for that old dragon? Sanren Rao shook his head and said, that's not the case. Kong Ing seems to be occupied with something and is unable to leave. Thus, he only sent a doppelganger this time. However, if it was his real body, Yang Chuan might not dare to ally with him. Sima Quan understood. That old dragon was able to fight with Kong Ing head-on and escape with his clone. It was obvious that he was not weak. Compared to Yang Chuan, he might even be stronger. However, he was more concerned about something else. He said, since the two of them have joined forces, do you think that the two clans will shake hands and make peace? Sanren Rao thought for a while and said, that might be possible, but it's not very likely. At least for now, the two of them are still on guard against each other. Otherwise, why would Kong Ing send a clone to kill the enemy? Moreover, the two clans have been fighting each other for the past few years. It's not something that can be stopped easily. True Lord Deng said, Sanren, this is a chance for us to grow stronger. Sanren Rao laughed. You're right. I've gained a lot from the old dragon, but I'm not willing to enjoy it alone. The two of you are my left and right arms, so you should benefit from it as well. He waved his sleeve and opened the palace gates. Inside, there was a pool of spiritual liquid. This is the Huanwei spiritual pool that the old dragon spent a lot of effort to refine. Originally, it was meant for him to enjoy, but now it's ours. This is a rare opportunity. The two of you can just enter and cultivate. How far you can go will depend on your own luck. Chapter 1380. After Zhang Yan walked out of the inner hall, Jing Yu, who was waiting outside, had a joyful expression. He came up and bowed. Congratulations on coming out of seclusion, Master. Zhang Yan asked, when I was in seclusion, did Spiritual Master Sima send any news? Jing Yu replied, there were 3 times. First, it was said that Kong Ing and Yang Chuan worked together to defeat the dragon monarch of Junqian world. Then, it was said that in order to instigate a war between the two families, they had no choice but to take a risk. The last time was 60 years ago. It was said that they had angered the Jade Liang cult. In order to avoid their pursuit, they had no choice but to flee to the savage desolate heaven region. Zhang Yan nodded. He walked to the side hall where the two-realm dial was placed. He reached out and pressed on it. There was a flash of spiritual light, but after a long time, there was no response. He thought for a while. If it wasn't that something happened to Sima Quan, then it was that the realm he was in was not suitable to use the dial. Sima Quan had the body of a heavenly demon and had been in Junqian realm for a long time. Unless someone like Kong Ing acted personally, it would be hard to kill him completely. Therefore, it was most likely the latter reason. However, other than Sima Quan, he had also buried Zhang Yi, a hidden chess piece. Now that 100 years had passed, some of his memories should have awakened. At that time, he could take out the two-realm dial from the spiritual boat and send the news back. Therefore, he was not afraid of not knowing what was happening in Junqian realm. He retracted his hand, waved his sleeves, and turned to walk out. 100 years of seclusion was just a short moment to him. It was nothing. However, the outside world was vast. Since he did not need to cultivate, he could come out and walk around. Jing Yu hurriedly followed behind. The moment Zhang Yan stepped out of the hall, the boar cow that was circling in the sky sensed his presence. It mooed and landed in front of the hall. It prostrated in front of the hall, its soft and thick fur trailing on the ground. This being was the most loyal to its master. In the 100 years that he had been in seclusion, it had been guarding outside the hall and had never gone to other realms. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I still need to cultivate in the sect. You don't have to wait here. You can go outside and have fun. If I need you, I will call for you." The pig bull's intelligence wasn't low. It let out a low moo and slowly floated into the air, flying towards the outer realm. As Zhang Yan watched him leave, he thought of something and asked, "Is there any movement from Zhang Chan?" Jing Yu bowed and said, "Reporting to master." In the past few years, Zhang Chan had sent back news one after another. Recently, there was news that the Oblivion Barrier, Star Wall Jade Ring, and the Chanting Dragon Formation on the Barren Star had been built. However, there was a shortage of manpower. The people from the 9 continents had only occupied a few mountains and rivers on the Earth star, and the barren people had just now awakened, so their numbers were not many. It was a pity that the rest of the vast land was occupied by demons. Zhang Yan pondered. It's still because of the lack of manpower. Do you remember that the 100 countries of the eastern wasteland gifted me with 100,000 slaves? Jing Yu replied, there was indeed such a thing. However, the spiritual masters of the islands were used to using their own people, so they placed them on an island. Later on, there were heavenly ghosts who could order them around, so they didn't ask anymore. Zhang Yan said, quickly go and find out how many people there are now. Jing Yu acknowledged and summoned a Jing Ren over to give him some instructions. The latter bowed and retreated. After a while, a spiritual light came. Jing Yu went to take it and opened it. He raised his head and said, Master, there are 5 million people on the island now. Zhang Yan nodded and said, that's quite a lot. Jing Yu said, according to the island deacon who was in charge of this place, these slaves were all young and strong. Every one of them had cultivated a body-strengthening technique. The island was protected by our sex formation, so there were no natural disasters or demonic invasions. The land was also suitable for farming. That's why there are so many of them. In recent years, there have been many cultivators going there to pick disciples. Zhang Yan said, since the Qianlong formation has been built on Wuxing, you can find a way to transfer 100,000 people from the island and send them there. Then find 100 disciples from Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake and send them there. Jing Yu said, this lowly one will obey. Zhang Yan asked again, I've been in seclusion for 100 years. Are there any changes inside and outside the sect? Jing Yu thought for a while and said, in these 100 years, nothing major happened. However, the system of 10 disciples has been changed. He took out a letter from his sleeve and said, "This is a letter from the left and right hall masters." Zhang Yan said, "Oh." He had expected that the system of 10 disciples would be changed, but he didn't want to move so quickly. Originally in the 9 continents, the Qinsong school only occupied the Great Lake of Dragon Lake. Due to the lack of spiritual opportunity, the number of spiritual points that could be worshipped was very limited. Now in the mountain and sea realm, there was only the Cold Jade Ocean Prefecture, which was now called the Dragon Lake. It was as big as the 9 continents. Therefore, out of practical considerations, the rules had to be changed. He took the report, and after reading it once, he nodded his head. After Qi Yuntian summoned the 2 hall masters to discuss, the 10 disciples were chosen as the 16 peak leaders. Each peak leader had to have Yuanian cultivation to be able to sit. In order to prevent any unforeseen events from happening after the sudden change of the rules, there were 24 official disciples under the 16 peak leaders. This position was similar to the original 10 disciples. As long as one had entered the core transformation stage, they could compete for the position. However, the original rules were the same. At the very least, one had to be a true disciple from the lower house to be qualified to sit. Zhang Yan was reading the letter when he suddenly heard a roar from a distant island. There was also the sound of metal being forged. He asked, "What are they forging?" Jingyu looked and said, "Master, that should be the Ho tribe. They are under the orders of the left and right hall masters to forge the Yuan Zhenyuan golden lock." Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. The Yuan Zhenyuan golden lock can even restrain great sages of this realm. Did the sect encounter some great demon in the northern reaches? Jingyu said, "Master, you are right. Recently, we encountered a white lion in the northern reaches. This demon is entrenched in a mountain. If our disciples are in danger, it will appear to help. However, this demon values its territory very much, and does not allow Qinsong school disciples to enter. Anyone who gets close will be swept away by its magical power. 3 heavenly ghost great sages went to suppress it, but they were all defeated. However, it did not injure anyone and they were all released. I heard that there are Taoists in the sect who believe that this kind of great demon knows when to advance and when to retreat. Since it does not cause any trouble and it is very far from the sect, we should just let it go. However, there are also Taoists who believe that even if this demon does not injure people now, it does not mean that it will not harm people in the future. Even if we do not take its life, we should find a way to capture it and use the rules to control it." Zhang Yan thought for a moment, then flicked his sleeve. The mountain, river, water, and land map of the mountain and sea realm immediately appeared in front of him. He asked, "Point out the place where the white lion is." Jingyu raised his finger and pointed at the north end. "Master, it's here." Zhang Yan's eyes narrowed slightly when he looked down. At first glance, there didn't seem to be any problems, but when he looked out from the ravine in the center of the 4 regions, the white lion's territory just happened to be in the north. What was interesting was that the Golden Luan Sect's palace was in the west, and the distance between the 2 and the ravine was also extremely close. There didn't seem to be anything when looked at separately, but when put together, it was rather subtle. He had a vague feeling that the white lion's background was not simple. However, with Sect Master Qin here, he should be able to see some clues, so there was no need for him to ask about it. With a flick of his sleeve, he scattered the scenery of mountains and rivers, then turned back to the hall and flipped through the records left behind by those who had broken through to the mortal transformation realm. Although he had already roughly looked through them, there were still quite a few erosion runes mixed in here. Without reaching the nascent embryo stage, it would be difficult for him to truly understand their profundities. As he immersed himself in this, several days passed without him realizing it. When he stopped, he felt that he had gained quite a bit. At this time, Jingyu said from outside, "Master, Taoist Master Wei heard that you have come out of seclusion, so he has come to pay a visit." Zhang Yan put down the jade scroll, smiled and said, "Call him in." Not long after, Wei Zihong entered the pill room, bowed and said, "Disciple pays his respects to Master." Zhang Yan looked at him a few times, nodded, and said, "The Yaoing clan's cultivation method is also extraordinary. You have just entered the grotto heaven not long ago, but your cultivation is already as if you have cultivated for hundreds of years. Wei Zihong replied, Disciple was just lucky. Zhang Yan smiled slightly and said, You are also a leader of a sect now, so there is no need to stand. Sit down and talk. Wei Zihong said yes, and sat down on the praying mat at the lower end. Although he had cultivated to the elephant realm, there were very few books left behind by the predecessors, so he still had many questions about cultivation. This was a rare opportunity, so after saying a few words, he seized the time to ask for guidance. As the master and disciple asked and answered, a day passed in the blink of an eye. When Wei Zihong woke up, he realized that so much time had passed, and hurriedly stood up to bow and said, Disciple was rude and delayed master's cultivation. Zhang Yan said, No matter, it was not easy for you to cultivate to this stage, and now you are the sect leader. If you have any questions in the future, if you can't get away, you can write to me. Wei Zihong was delighted and said, Thank you, master. He paused, and then took out 3 letters from his sleeve and said, Master, these are the letters that senior sister Wang and junior brother Han have asked me to bring. Master, please take a look. Zhang Yan had already expected this, and took the letters and opened them, and sighed slightly. The Wang sisters and Han Zwicheng had lived for more than 1,000 years, and their lifespans were coming to an end. The 3 of them had the intention of reincarnating, but without their master's permission, they did not dare to do it in private. Now that they heard that Zhang Yan had come out of seclusion, they asked Wei Zihong to ask on their behalf. Zhang Yan said, Zihong, when you go back, call Kai Wei, Kading, and Zwicheng to see me tomorrow. Wei Zihong said yes, and he also sighed, and said, The 2 senior sisters have treated this disciple very well, and junior brother Han is also like a brother to this disciple. Even now, everything that happened in the past is still vivid in my mind. We have been fellow disciples for 1,000 years, and now that we are suddenly separated, my heart is also somewhat reluctant. Zhang Yan raised his eyes to look at the world outside and said, Since I've taken all of you as my disciples, I will naturally not allow all of you to fall into the mortal world and be unable to transcend. Moreover, this isn't a bad thing. With me here, it'll be a completely different scene once they reincarnate. Chapter 1381. In the micro-spiritual pool, Sima Quan's entire body was emitting a strange spiritual light. He had taken over this body. At first, he was worried that the spiritual pool would be useless to him. It wasn't that he didn't want to benefit from it, but he was afraid that Rao Sanren would see through him. After he entered, he realized that there was no need for such worries. Once his body came into contact with the pool water, countless extremely pure turbid spiritual opportunities surged in. After a little circulation, not only did his body's natal chi become full, even his heavenly demon body was strengthened. When he saw that Deng Zhenjuan was doing the same, he finally understood that whoever entered the pool would most likely receive the most beneficial benefits. Thus, he let go of his thoughts and focused on absorbing the spiritual chi in the area. After 6 years, Deng Zhenjuan felt that he had reached his limit. No matter how much he circulated his spiritual energy, he couldn't get any benefits. He walked out of the pool with a look of regret. He shook his sleeve, and a few drops of pool water were collected. He turned around and saw that Sima Quan was still cultivating with his eyes closed. There was still room for improvement. He sighed and walked out without disturbing him. In terms of cultivation, Sima Quan didn't surpass Deng Zhenjuan by too much. But the difference was that not only was his body nourished by the spiritual pool, even his heavenly demon body was absorbing spiritual opportunity. What was even rarer was that he had many doppelgangers who could benefit from it. Naturally, they would take longer. The only pity was that the doppelgangers who were too far away and not in the range of his senses couldn't benefit from it. In the blink of an eye, another 4 years passed. Sima Quan felt that he couldn't get any more benefits from the spiritual pool. He didn't stay any longer and stood up. In these few years, his cultivation had improved, but it was only a little faster than usual. A cultivator's cultivation had to be cultivated step by step. Even if they had enough external supplements, They wouldn't get much stronger in one go. It wasn't that they couldn't do it, but they were afraid that it would disrupt their own cultivation rhythm. Only those with unparalleled talent and a strong foundation would be excluded. People like them couldn't be measured with common sense. For example, the leader of Yuliangism, Kong In, was like that. The real benefit he got this time was that the spiritual pool had deepened his potential. It meant that he could go further in the future and reach higher realms more easily. Something like this that could change one's natural talent was simply too shocking. In fact, it could even turn a mediocre person into a genius. Inwardly, he couldn't help but muse, I wonder if the mountain and sea realm could create something like this? Then he denied it in his heart. Not to mention the fact that the junior disciples could not withstand the penetration of such spiritual vigor, even with the ability of the real dragon. It seemed like it would take tens of thousands of years to refine such a pool of water. If there was such time, it would be better to find a few disciples with outstanding qualifications. It would be a thankless effort to waste it on mediocre people. He opened his hand, and a small bronze cauldron flew out, collecting some of the pool water. He planned to bring it back in the future and see what it was made of. When he did this, he didn't do it sneakily. Instead, he did it out in the open, explaining that he was doing it for his disciples. Deng Zhenjuan had done the same thing before, and Rao Wanderer had seen it happen but didn't stop it. Clearly, he had tacitly approved of it. San Sanren smiled, there's no need to thank me. There are very few people in the Great Dust Realm who cultivate turbid chi and spiritual opportunity. If there was one who became a true lord, I would help him. Moreover, San Sanren Rao saw it and didn't stop it. It was obvious that he approved of it. San Sanren Rao smiled, you don't have to thank me. There are very few people in the Great Dust Realm who cultivate turbid chi and spiritual opportunity. But if there is one who becomes a true lord, I will help him. Moreover, this opportunity is due to Taoist Quan Ming's reminder. It is something you deserve. San Sanren Rao said, speaking of which, I'm still basking in Taoist Quan Ming's light. San Sanren Rao laughed again and said, that's true. He looked into the Huanwei spiritual pool and found that it was much more used up than when Deng Zhenjuan had come out. However, not only was he not unhappy, he was very satisfied. The more Sima Yan's strength improved, the more help he would be to him in the future. Moreover, this performance also proved that he had a good eye. San Sanren Rao said, San Sanren, I have a question. This spiritual pool is useful to us, but to the old dragon, it's not very useful. Why did he create this? San Sanren Rao said, you don't know, but the old dragon has a secret technique that can refine his body and return from the beginning. This pool is for him to improve his foundation in the future. Refine his body and return from the beginning? There's such a secret technique in the world? San Sanren Rao wasn't surprised. He then sighed, that dragon monarch is already at the peak of this world, why did he have to do this? San Sanren Rao shook his head and said, no matter how strong he was, didn't he still lose to Kong In? The old dragon's disciples and grand disciples once said that before this, the old dragon had already foreseen this. He knew that it was very likely that he would be defeated by human cultivators in the future, so he spent who knows how many tens of thousands of years to refine this spirit pool. However, man proposes, God disposes. In the end, it was all for naught. Sima Quan snorted. To refine one's body was the same as killing himself. Besides his life, he might even have to give up all his magical power and divine abilities. Who knew how many tens of thousands of years the dragon monarch had cultivated to this point? But he was willing to give it up just like that. Clearly, he was very courageous. If Sima Quan were in his shoes, he might not have the same determination. He thought for a moment and said, San Sanren, what should I do later? We are still too weak to interfere in the battle between the two clans. The two of you should stay here and cultivate well. Don't go out carelessly. If Yang Chuan and Kong In don't join forces, then there will be a battle in the future. When that time comes, we'll decide what to do according to the situation. Sima Quan nodded, but in his heart he thought, it seems that I won't be able to communicate with the mountain and sea realm for a while. Just now, when he was cultivating, he had sensed some movement from the dual realm dial. But he didn't dare to use it here, and couldn't even take it out. He could only wait for the right time to come. Cold Light Heavenly Domain, King Li's planet. The Qi Accumulation Palace had a total of 196 temples. 10 of them were under the control of the Imperial Palace, and the rest were under the control of the Kai Chang Temple. Zhang Yi was one of them. He had spent more than 100 years cultivating to the third stage of the core transformation realm. His progress was neither good nor bad. But this was exactly what he needed, to avoid drawing attention to himself as much as possible. At this point in time, his memories had gradually increased, and he knew exactly what he should do. However, as Zhang Yan's clone, if someone wanted to find something from his soul, then he would immediately forget everything and not allow anyone to find any flaws in him. At this time, he was sitting in the inner room, looking at a piece of paper. It was drawn by the previous people of the Qi Accumulation Palace using the Dao observation technique. As long as he visualized it, his cultivation would unconsciously follow it, and he would become more and more compatible with the sect. If it weren't for the fact that his soul was different, the more he cultivated, the more he would agree with the Qi Accumulation Palace. Throughout history, people who cultivated like this were the most valued by the upper echelons of the Qi Accumulation Palace. There was the sound of jade striking, and a disciple carrying incense walked in. He cupped his hands and said, "Temple Master, the officials of the Ning province have sent a memorial to you. They say that there has been a drought in the province for a month, and they would like to invite Temple Master to perform a spell to help the people." The cultivators of the Junchen domain had a close relationship with the secular world. As Kai Chang, Zhang Yi had to adjust and control the climate of the 4 seasons. If it was a county, then the fairy building could do it for him. But once it involved a province, he had to do it. He might have great power now, and even the kings of the vassals and kingdoms had to listen to him. But every half a year, there would be a special evaluation from the palace. If he performed poorly 3 times in a row, he would be stripped of his position and sent to the remote heavenly regions to listen to orders. His current identity was very important, and he didn't want to throw it away. So he had to be careful. He asked, "Have you given enough offerings?" The disciple carrying incense said, "I've checked, and they've all been given." The vassal states usually gave 2 sets of offerings. One was given to the main palace of the Qi Accumulation Palace, and the other was given to Kai Chang as a form of filial piety. However, the latter could not be stated clearly, and it was fine as long as both sides knew it. Actually, Zhang Yi's spirit boat had many external herbs, and he didn't care much about them. But since everyone in the same generation did the same, he could only follow suit and not break the rules. Otherwise, it would be difficult for him to do anything. Also, it wasn't bad to take more offerings. Even if he didn't use it himself, he could use most of it to buy people's hearts. He counted with his fingers and said, "You can go and reply. 3 days later, there will be rain in the corner." After all, he wasn't a Yuanian cultivator, so he had to make some preparations before he went to summon the rain. The disciple carrying incense left as he was told. Zhang Yi put away the painting and was about to go back to prepare the rain magic tool when he suddenly heard a tinkling sound from above. He looked up and saw a wooden bird pecking at a copper mirror. His heart stirred and he immediately sent a surge of magic power into it. After a few breaths, the figure of a middle-aged cultivator appeared in the copper mirror. He cupped his hands and said, "Junior Marshal Brother Zhang, long time no see." Zhang Yi smiled and said, "So it's Senior Brother Yuan. Why are you in the mood to talk to me?" He was someone who had passed the Dao examination and was an official disciple of the Qi Accumulation Palace. Many of his peers were appointed on the main planet, and Yuan Shan was one of them. He was close to Zhang Yi, and if there were any changes in the palace, he would immediately inform Zhang Yi. Yuan Shan shook his head and said, "I'm not in the mood. I heard that Yuliangism invaded the Changde heavenly region a few days ago. That place is very close to the cold light heavenly region. Junior brother, you must be careful." Zhang Yi nodded and said, "Thank you for telling me, Senior Brother Yuan. But if Yuliangism really attacked, where can I go?" "That's true. Yuan Shan sighed, then lowered his voice and said, "Have you heard recently? It's said that in order to prevent too many disciples from dying, the palace lord and Kong Ing have agreed to fight in the Ding heavenly region in 100 years. Zhang Yi smiled and said, "Is this information accurate? I don't want it to turn out to be false." Yuan Shan said, "Who knows? My position is too low, so I can only do such groundless things." Zhang Yi and Yuan Shan chatted for a while more before the mirror light disappeared. He frowned. In fact, he had heard such news many times before, but each time it was proven to be a rumor. But this time, for some reason, he felt that there was a high chance that it was true. If that was the case, then it would be a huge matter that involved the two worlds. He thought to himself, "Looks like I need to find an opportunity to report this to the sect." Chapter 1382. After Zhang Yi prepared the magic tools, he rode the Dan Sha and went to Ning province. The trip was very smooth. After only 7 days, he returned to Kai Chong Guan Temple. At that point, he heard that the flying ships that had invaded the frigid light heavenly realm had retreated. When the lower-level cultivators in the frigid light heavenly realm heard about this, they felt as if they had just survived a calamity. Once a great battle broke out, the lofty true monarchs could escape if they didn't want to fight to the death, as long as they didn't do anything that would incur the wrath of the heavens. In the past, Yuliangism used to imprison all of its captives, and then persuade them to join the sect. But after Sima Quan had killed all of the disciples in the three morning heaven realm, it was hard to say what would happen. Now that the cultivators of the sect had retreated, it was for the best. That was good news, but Zhang Yi sensed that something was off. Before arriving at the Copper Mirror, he contacted one of his fellow disciples in the Aura Condensation Palace to ask about the reason for Yuliangism's retreat. However, after asking a few people, he still couldn't figure out the reason. Moreover, he received another piece of news that the Yuliang sect had not only retreated, but they had also abandoned the Changda heavenly region that they had occupied. His nervousness grew. If the Aura Condensation Palace hadn't surrendered, then the two sects must have reached some sort of tacit agreement. What could it be? His mind raced. If Kong Yin and Yang Chuan had agreed to fight in 100 years, then it would make sense. After all, if a victor was decided, then the winner would be able to take over everything. It didn't matter how many realms they attacked, it would be pointless. But if they decided to stop fighting and join forces to attack the mountain and sea realm, then it would be very dangerous. Originally, he had planned to ask around, and then send word back to the mountain and sea realm. But now, he didn't have the luxury of time to think about it. He gave some instructions to the disciples in the temple, then flew away. An hour later, he landed deep in the mountains in front of a cliff. He pushed his hand out, and a cave appeared. After entering, he used an incantation to activate the restrictive spell formations he had set up. In order to prevent anyone from spying, he lit up another mortal affinity incense. Soon, the surroundings were filled with billowing smoke. This kind of high incense had another name in the mortal world. It was called wishes come true, and could create many illusions. Because it was very real, it could even deceive the senses of cultivators. Some disciples of the Qi Accumulation Palace simply used it to adjust their state of mind and train their will. With the concealment of this incense, not only could it prevent others from spying on him, it could even deceive his own 5 senses. As long as one's heart remained calm, it could be said to be very simple and useful. However, he was still worried. With a wave of his sleeve, he released the spiritual boat that brought him here and entered it. When he reached here, he let out a sigh of relief. This boat was what Guochanghe had used to escape from Junchen realm. It was Baohuan Palace's spiritual boat. The restriction formation on it also had the ability to block out perception. He walked forward and found 2 objects that were like sharp awls and glowed with silver light. He placed them together and then bit the tip of his tongue. He spat out a mouthful of blood essence on it and muttered something. Then, wisps of spiritual light shone from it and finally transformed into a 2 realms dial. This dial was specially made for him by the Bao Yang courtyard. Only his own blood essence and the incantation could be used. He was not as powerful as Sima Quan. Only people like the Emperor could defeat him. If someone obtained the Two Realms dial, it was very likely that they would be able to trace it back to the Mountain and Sea realm. Therefore, this method was necessary. He pressed his hand on the dial. His cultivation was still low, so to use this object, he could only rely on the spiritual opportunity that he had already poured into it. After a while, a beam of spiritual light shot up and Zhang Yan's figure appeared. He smiled and said, "I've been waiting for you for a long time. You finally sent a message." When Zhang Yi saw this, his mind buzzed and he immediately knew where he came from. However, after this conversation, he would forget about this matter and return to his previous track. He cupped his hands and said seriously, "I have something important to tell you." Zhang Yan nodded. For the time being, there was no news from Sima Quan. This was the perfect time for the clone to contact him. Zhang immediately explained all of the information he had gathered. In order to avoid missing anything, he basically repeated everything he had heard. He couldn't be sure what Yuliangism and the Energy Accumulation Palace would do, but he was confident that the Mountain and Sea realm would be able to make the right decision. After listening, Zhang Yan said, "I understand. If there is any more news, send it to me immediately." Zhang Yi said, "Of course." Zhang Yan flicked his sleeve, cutting off the spiritual light from the Two Realms dial. Then he clasped his hands behind his back and began to think. If Yuliangism and the Energy Accumulation Palace were working together, then the Mountain and Sea realm still had a lot of time. This was not something that could be done immediately, and there was no way they could hide it from their subordinates. If something like this happened, even if Sima Quan had to expose himself, he would still send a message. Even if he was killed, the clone would think of a way to inform Zhang Yi. But if Kong Yin and Yang Chuan really had agreed to fight in 100 years, then the people of the Junshan realm would not arrive so quickly. They would have at least another 100 years. No matter how you looked at it, the Mountain and Sea realm still had plenty of time to prepare. But things were not that simple. There was something that could easily be overlooked. If Kong Yin and Yang Chuan guessed that there were spies from the Mountain and Sea realm in the Junshan realm, and deliberately leaked the news, then headed for the Mountain and Sea realm, then what? This was not impossible. After all, not long ago, the old dragon had suffered a setback because of this. However, if they wanted to do that, they could only send a few people or perhaps Kong Yin and Yang Er. Just now, they could avoid alerting anyone. If that was the case, then it was possible that Kong Yin and the others were already on their way to the Mountain and Sea realm. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. If that's the case, he mused, and if my plan works, then perhaps I can buy more time to prepare. But if it doesn't work, then the war between the two realms will begin earlier. He thought about it for a moment, then walked out of the temple. He had been summoned by the divine will, and instantly he was in an unfathomable space. In the next moment, Qin Mabai, Yu Xianshao, and Shui Dingyuan appeared here as well. Besides these three sect masters, there was one more person here, and it was Shaoqing's elder, Ying Chuanxiu. He'd attained mortal transformation during the 100 years that Zhang Yan had been in closed-door cultivation. Sect leader Qin was the first to speak. Hall Master Duzhen summoned me by divine will. Is there any urgent news from the Junshan realm? Zhang Yan said in a serious tone, that is indeed the case. Sect leader Qin saw how serious Zhang Yan was, so he knew that this matter was definitely not simple, so he said, Palace Master Duzhen, please speak. Zhang Yan nodded. First, he told sect leader Qin what Zhang Yi had said. Then, he told him his own speculation. If this matter is as disciple guessed, then no matter what, we must think of a way to deal with it. Sect leader Qin thought for a long time, then said, based on the actions of those two, there is truth within falsehood and falsehood within truth. What Hall Master Duzhen said is not a lie. It is highly likely that it will happen. Yu Xianshao said indifferently, the dragon monarch has been killed. I presume that those two have nothing to worry about. Although Shui Dingyuan and Ying Chuanxiu did not say anything, their expressions were solemn. They could tell that what sect leader Qin said was true. If they did not handle it well, the Mountain and Sea realm might face a great battle in a short period of time. At that time, they would have to face powerful enemies like Kong Ing and Yang Chuan. Sect leader Qin's expression was still calm. He said calmly, "It is not that there is no way to turn the situation around. Before they figure out the truth about us, given their status, they will not make such a risky move. This might seem dangerous, but if the realm deals with it properly, we can still avoid it." Zhang Yan agreed. "Sect leader, you are right. If those two had no misgivings about us, they would not have deliberately misled us and released such information. Therefore, it is very likely that this is just a test." At this point, his tone became slightly heavier. "If we do not have the corresponding strength, or if we simply relax because of this, then they will definitely attack without hesitation. But on the contrary, if they find that we are more difficult to deal with than they had imagined, they will not make a move unless they have absolute confidence." Sect leader Qin nodded. "This matter can only fall on Ingui." Zhang Yan smiled. "Disciple and sect leader have the same thoughts. However, we need to carefully discuss what to do." After a brief discussion in the divine will, everyone retreated. Zhang Yan retracted his divine will and emerged from his meditative state. His eyes flickered with a bright light. It didn't matter if Kong Ing, Yang Chuan, or the others came, he had to seize every opportunity to improve his cultivation base. Now that he was in the nascent core stage, he needed to constantly refine first nascent energy. That was something he had to rely on his own quintessence and magical power to make up for. Therefore, he needed to constantly supplement himself with external medicines, of which the pure violet spiritual qi was the best. In the past, when he was in the 9 continents, the Qinsong school could only support the cultivation of 3 nascent core cultivators at a time. It could be considered a huge hurdle. But now that he was in the mountain and sea realm, the pure violet spiritual qi was abundant, and there were no such limitations. Therefore, this step was not a big problem. Once his first nascent energy was fully replenished, and his foundation was fully established, he could try to find the root fruit. Here was another hurdle. The root fruit was born in the heavens opened by a cultivator. However, it was very erratic, constantly changing between the heavens. The more you wanted to find it, the more you would try to avoid it. At the beginning, cultivators could only focus on one heavenly realm. As time passed, they would gradually be able to take care of the other heavens. Sometimes, it depended on one's luck. If one's luck was good, they would be able to find it quickly. If not, they would be unable to find it even after a long time. Ordinary people could only pass 6 heavenly barriers, but Zhang Yan had a total of 12. This meant that the difficulty he faced on this Tao far exceeded that of ordinary cultivators. However, he knew that the higher a cultivator went, the narrower the path would be. How far one could go depended on one's own potential and foundation. The stronger one's foundation was, the greater the chance of achieving the Tao. However, once one's potential was exhausted, there would be no hope of going further. Therefore, if he successfully passed this heavenly barrier, then his future achievements would far surpass those of his generation. Chapter 1383. While Zhang Yan was in secluded meditation, sect leader Qin and Qi Yuntian had already arrived in front of Ingui. This giant Kuan was the mount of the great underworld patriarch, and because it had been sealed in the reflective wall for too long, its strength had yet to recover. It had been in the mountain and sea realm for more than 200 years, and although it had been constantly replenished with pure violet spiritual qi, it was still far from fully recovering. There was a reason that was difficult for outsiders to understand. When the giant Kuan had first arrived in the realm of the 9 continents, it had only been a child. However, it was not easy for a demon of this level to grow up. Because the 9 continents realm did not have enough pure violet spiritual qi to support it, it had been in a weak state for a long time. Now that it had been unsealed, it would only be able to replenish its vitality for several hundred years. Although its strength would increase during this time, it would be very slow. Fortunately, the giant Kuan had lived for a long time. Regardless of how strong it was in battle, its aura alone was strong enough to stand shoulder to shoulder with someone like Kong Ing. This was one of the reasons why demonic patriarch Go Yu had been frightened away by the sight of the giant Kuan when he arrived in the frigid Jade Sea prefecture. After some thought, sect leader Qin realized that it would not be easy to hide from Kong Ying and Yang Chuan. As cultivators of the Qi Dao, they were 100 times better than demonic patriarch Go Yu in distinguishing between truth and falsehood. The only difference was that unless they actually entered the mountain and sea realm, they would only be able to spy from the outer realm. The great Kuan had never intentionally cultivated, and it only needed to continue growing before it would be able to obtain a formidable strength that could shake the heavens and the earth. Thus, it was usually extremely lazy, but if it could be urged to slightly adjust the scattered vital energy in its body and condense it seriously, then not only would it be sufficient to deceive those that intended to spy on it, even the speed at which it repaired itself would increase because of this. After all, it had been brought by the great underworld patriarch from the outer realm. It had a special meaning to the Qinsong school, and its status was also very high. Therefore, after arriving in the mountain and sea realm, Zhu Zhen of the Qinsong school had not asked it to do anything. Instead, he had allowed it to do as it pleased. However, now that they were about to face a powerful enemy from the outer realm, they could not do so. Sect leader Qin began to converse with the giant Kuan. Although Big Kuan was lazy and reluctant at first, it couldn't go against the order of the Qinsong sect leader after all, so it could only do as he was told. After a while, sect leader Qin retracted his spirit. At this stage, he did not think that everything was settled. He believed that he still needed some celestial artifacts and external medicine to make preparations to patch up all the flaws and loopholes. Based on this calculation, it would take about 3 to 4 years even if it was the fastest. If Kong Yin and Yang Chuan were to arrive before this, then all these preparations would be useless. It wasn't impossible. After all, if the two of them had rushed over to the mountain and sea realm before the announcement was made, then they should have arrived by now. Sect Master Qin considered this point and decided not to place all his hopes on the Big Kuan. He decided to make another arrangement. He reached into his sleeve and took out the void essence black hole. He silently circulated his magic power for a moment, then waved his horsetail whisk. In an instant, the treasure disappeared into the void. With the sect's signature treasure floating in this realm, even if Kong Yin and the others tried to barge in, they could still act as a deterrent. If they were forced into a situation where they couldn't retreat, they could open the third restrictive spell and use the treasure's devouring power to deal with their opponents. However, it was very likely that both sides would perish together. Therefore, he had to make all the necessary arrangements. He turned to Qi Yuntan and said, "Yun, listen carefully. Today, I will teach you how to use the void essence black hole. If we are not here in the future, you can take it. If this sect's signature treasure wasn't infused with magic power beforehand, then only Taoist Master Fan Tu could wield it. Originally, Meng Zhen was the best candidate. However, he had gone to the evil realm and no one knew how long it would take for him to return. As for Zhang Yan as Palace Master Du Zhen and the sect's strongest force, if there were invaders, he would be the first to face them. Therefore, the responsibility of cleaning up after the battle could only be placed on Qi Yuntian's shoulders. Qi Yuntian listened attentively and memorized the technique. Sect Master Qin reminded him, "When you go back, make some arrangements. If people from the Great Dust Realm break in, make sure that the sect's disciples can retreat in time. However, remember not to make too much of a commotion." Qi Yuntian said, "Sect Master, do you want to order some disciples to leave first?" Sect Master Qin shook his head and said in a low voice, "It's not good to panic. Those who could leave in advance must be the elites of the sect." However, they didn't know when Kong Yin and the others would come. Even now, whether they would come or not was just a guess. Could it be that if Kong Yin and the others didn't come, the disciples wouldn't come? Then how could they cultivate? Qi Yuntian bowed and said, "Disciple knows what to do." In the Hall of Crossing Truth, Zhang Yan didn't care about what was happening outside. He only focused on improving his cultivation. A steady stream of first origin qi emerged from his body and was then channeled into the 12 heavens. Before truly entering the mortal shedding stage, The Chi Path Dharma body couldn't be separated from the corporeal body. Therefore, the person was considered to be the nascent embryo of the true seed. His foundation was extremely firm and his magic power was abnormally thick. Most importantly, his corporeal body was at the 6th transformation of strength path. Almost every moment he could feel his cultivation rising. At the same time, the purple clear spiritual vigor he consumed reached a huge amount. If he took out the stone jade lake now, it would probably be sucked clean in a few hours. However, after 2 years, he had used up hundreds of years of purple clear spiritual vigor. Therefore, he used 5 years to go to the outer space to collect spiritual vigor. After returning, he went into seclusion again. After another 2 years, he suddenly felt an inexplicable feeling. He couldn't help but look up. His gaze seemed to see outside the void. They're finally here. His magic power hadn't reached the level where he could detect the arrival of people from the outer space at any time. However, ever since he was on guard, he was always paying attention. Just now, there was a trace of disharmony in his feeling. If there was no accident, it should be the people from the Junshin realm. In the void primordial sea, there were 2 Taoists standing on a translucent and narrow spiritual boat. They were the sect master of Yuliangism, Kong Yin, and the palace master of Qi Accumulation Palace, Yang Chuan. Kong Yin was dressed in a pure white cloak. His crown was adorned with jewels and pearls. His jade-like appearance was elegant and handsome, and his bearing was tall and straight. His gaze was gentle and polite. At first glance, he seemed to be a person with rich emotions. However, if one looked closely, there was only dead silence in his eyes. There was no ripple. It was as if the traces of emotions were constantly being worn away and killed. Yang Chuan, on the other hand, had a head full of white hair. He looked old and withered, but in the blink of an eye, he turned back into a young child. In the next moment, he became a man in his prime, and in the next moment, he became a high-spirited young man. He seemed to be constantly changing from young to old. If it wasn't for the jade ruler in his hand, there seemed to be a few people taking turns. At this moment, although the 2 of them were walking together, this was only for the convenience of communication. If there was a person with similar skills standing nearby, they would discover that Yang Chuan maintained a faint sense of alienation and vigilance towards the person beside him. In fact, even though he joined hands with Kong Yin to fight against the old dragon, he did not trust him. Fortunately, they were in the void primordial sea, and there was no point in fighting here. He did not need to be too afraid of this opponent. He tried to sense for a long time, but he felt that in the opposite space, there was a powerful and vigorous aura wantonly leaking out. Because the aura was too strong, all other auras were covered by it. He couldn't help but frown and said, "What a powerful aura." Could it be that the cultivators of the 9 continents knew that we were coming and were already prepared? That's why they let such a strange creature out? Kong Yin said, "No matter how prepared they are, they still need to have enough foundation and strength to rely on. It seems that there are powerful people among them who can compete with us." He did not care whether the 9 continents had seen through his plan or not. It could even be said that the previous news was released on purpose. Because in this way, if the cultivators of the 9 continents did not want to start a war, they had to show their strongest side, which would reveal their true strength. If the opponent was weaker than him, then he would rush in without hesitation. But if the opponent was strong enough, then he would choose to be cautious and wait for an opportunity to strike. Yang Chuan stroked his beard and thought for a moment. Suddenly, his eyes flashed and he said, "I thought that the other side was putting up a strong front. If they really have such strength, why not show weakness? This way, they can trick me and Headmaster Kong into going in. Won't they be able to deal with us at the same time?" Kong Yin said indifferently, "Such a strong qi cannot be faked. Moreover, they do not know when we will arrive. If they are not strong enough, they can maintain it for several years or even dozens of years. Even if they have the cultivation of an imperial emperor, they will not be able to withstand it. But there is one thing, whether the owner of this qi is at his peak or not, we cannot tell." Yang Chuan made an "oh" sound. He thought for a moment and said, "Headmaster Kong, are you saying that the person might not be able to use his full strength?" That is possible. If there was a powerful person in my palace who was injured by some accident and did not want to act, perhaps they would also put up such a formation. At this point he turned to look at Kong In. Since we are here, Headmaster Kong, would you like to enter the realm with me? Kong In said calmly, what we have gained today is enough. Let's go back. Yang Chuan was a little surprised, but he did not object. He just snorted, turned the boat around, and headed back to the Great Dust Realm. Kong In looked back in the direction of the Mountain and Sea Realm. It was possible that the cultivators of the 9 continents were just bluffing. If he was just a rogue cultivator with no worries, he could do whatever he wanted. As long as there was a 30% chance that he could enter the realm and find out the other side's strength. But he was the leader of a sect, so he could not act so recklessly. He not only had to consider himself, but also the hundreds of millions of followers behind him. Right now, Yuliangism was being supported by his own power. If he died or was captured, it would immediately be torn apart, and the other powers in the Great Dust Realm would divide it up. With such a heavy responsibility on his shoulders, he would not do something so dangerous. In addition to that, there was another reason that he could not explain. If the cultivators of the 9 continents were weak, and yet they were able to invite such a greater demon, that was even more terrifying. It meant that they had an extremely powerful legacy behind them, and who knew what kind of people were involved in that. If he could, he would rather change his opponent. But the truth was that he had no other choice. The Mountain and Sea Realm was the only place in the Great Dust Realm that was suitable for cultivators to live in. And no matter what, the cultivators of the 9 continents could not be more difficult to deal with than the true young great demon. The war between the 2 realms was not now, but in the future. It would happen sooner or later. Chapter 1384. When Kong In and Yang Chuan were watching from the outer realm, sect leader Qin and the others were also aware of it. They were ready to fight at any time and place. Only when they left did they retract their auras. People like them rarely did things repeatedly. Since they had left, it was unlikely that they would return. However, they still needed to be on guard. The traps they had set up to deal with the enemy were still there. Including Zhang Yan, all the spiritual masters gathered their spirit wills together and entered the void space. After greeting each other, Yu Xianshao said coldly, they left today so that they can come back tomorrow. If they come back then, they will be more prepared. Xue Dingyuan felt that it was a pity. After this incident, Yuliangism and the Qi Accumulation Palace will not fight again. Zhang Yan nodded. Sect leader Xue is right. Kong In and Yang Chuan came not only to test the waters, but also to determine the future of the 2 sections. There had always been a contradiction in the Junshan realm, and that was whether Yuliangism and the Qi Accumulation Palace should join forces or annex each other. If they joined forces, then they could use their strength in one direction. The benefits were obvious, but the price they had to pay was not small. On the surface, the Qi Accumulation Palace was in charge of defense. This choice depended on Yuliangism, but in reality, it depended on the Mountain and Sea Realm. In the past, the Mountain and Sea Realm was dominated by Heavenly Ghost. Kong In could destroy it with a flip of his hand. It did not matter whether the Qi Accumulation Palace existed or not. However, with the cultivators of the 9 continents, he had to choose carefully. When Kong In saw that there were cultivators of the 9 continents who could stand up to him, he would most likely give up on attacking the Qi Accumulation Palace and choose to join forces. However, this could not be helped. If the 9 continents did not use the power of the giant Leviathan, then there was no need to wait. Right now, they would have to face a life-or-death battle. At the end of the day, they did not have enough power, so they had fewer choices. Sect leader Qin said in a low voice, I will urge Ingui to recover as soon as possible. What the cultivators of the 9 regions lacked right now was time. If they could have 500 years of peace and stability, then there would be no need for any strategy. They could directly set up a battle array and fight head-on. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, if Kong In, Yang Chuan, and the others come again, they will definitely bring all the monarchs in Junshan. But according to what Sima Jinren said, There are still a few monarchs like Wanderer Rao who are unwilling to submit and left barren desolate heavenly domain. They are not part of the two clans. To ensure that they have no worries, they will definitely try to subdue and kill them one by one. When they have sorted out these matters, they will come again. In a battle between two realms, the cultivators of the mortal metamorphosis realm would fight first. If the cultivators of the Junshin realm came, they would not bring their disciples immediately. That would only drag them down. Only when they had the upper hand or delayed their peers would they come. And in this kind of battle of the lower levels, the cultivators of the mortal metamorphosis realm would usually not interfere. After all, at their realm, they were respected and high above. If they had to do everything themselves, then what was the point of having disciples? Before that, in order to prevent their sect's headquarters from being threatened, they would first clean up all the people in the inner realm who were unwilling to submit in order to eliminate any hidden dangers. Sect Master Qin thought for a moment and said, Palace Master Duzhen, did Spiritual Master Sima say that he joined a wanderer named Rao who is also from the demonic sect? Zhang Yan replied, that's right. According to Zhenren Sima, this person once relied on the Qi accumulation palace and is suspected to be a subordinate of the dragon god. Now, he also has his own plans. However, this person seems to have appeared out of nowhere. Zhenren Sima has tried to find out his background but did not obtain any useful information. I have also asked Zhenren Gua, but he said that when he came here, he had never heard of this person. Shui Dingyuan frowned and asked, Spiritual Master Zhang, I have a doubt. Is this person from another realm? It was no wonder he asked this. Putting aside the Junshin realm for now, the matter of the Golden Imperial sect was still unsettled. Zhang Yan said, this is hard to say, but the possibility is not high. The Qi accumulation palace was willing to accept this person, which means that at least Yang Chuan has a plan. It was impossible to cultivate to the mortal metamorphosis realm without a background. There had to be a powerful force supporting them. Otherwise, where would their cultivation method come from? Where would the external medicine for cultivation come from? If his past was really a blank slate, how would Yang Chuan dare to keep him by his side? Shui Dingyuan pondered for a moment and said, since this person is not on good terms with the two families, then Spiritual Master Sima's location is very important. As long as we find a way to prevent this person from joining Kong and Yang, then as long as he is around, the two families will not be able to attack with ease. Zhang Yan said, we don't know where Spiritual Master Sima is now, and we can't contact him with the dual realm dial. However, this is not completely impossible. I can try to make some arrangements. Sect Master Qin said, this matter can be handled by Palace Master Duzhen first. If there is anything you need support from the sect, then you can tell me again. Zhang Yan nodded. He had already thought it through. Next, he would either send another person or get that clone to find a way to contact Sima Quan. If it was the latter method, there was nothing wrong with it. However, if it was the former method, then he would have to think about it carefully. At least, it would be a problem to choose a person. However, this did not mean that the cultivators of the 9 continents could not do anything else. He raised his head to look at the people here, and the light in his eyes suddenly became sharp. He said, Sect Master Spiritual Masters, I have a suggestion. If the Junshin realm can be delayed, that would be the best. If not, why don't we take the initiative to kill our way into the Junshin realm? Take the initiative to kill our way into the Junshin realm? As soon as his murderous words came out, the others thought about it for a moment before they all expressed their agreement. Sect Master Qin nodded and said, Palace Master Du Zhen's suggestion is not impossible. Yu Xianshao said in praise, this is exactly what I am thinking. Since we are going to fight sooner or later, why do we have to wait for these people to come? Why don't we just kill our way in? Before Zhang Yan made this suggestion, he had already thought about it carefully. If they waited for the cultivators of the Junshin realm to kill their way in, then no matter who won or lost, the battle between more than 10 mortal metamorphosis realm cultivators would definitely cause great damage to the mountain and sea realm. Rather than that, it would be better to directly fight in the Junshin realm. Even if there were damage, it would not affect them. The reason why he dared to think this way was because of an important factor that could not be ignored. The Junshin realm was already prepared to abandon its own realm because of the threat of the true young expert. Therefore, it did not have any defenses, unlike the mountain and sea realm, which had constructed many grand formations. This was understandable. It was originally a place that was about to be abandoned. Of course, there was no need to put much effort into managing it. As for defenses, that was even more superfluous. Originally, Zhang Yan had thought of sending someone from the 9 continents to take the Void Yuan profound cave to the Junshin realm and open the 3 layers of the seal to devour the realm. On the surface, the chances of success were very high. However, this was actually not a good idea. Because this was a magical treasure of the Qinsong school, due to the rules, only the cultivators of the school could do such a thing. Sect leader Qin was the leader of the school and could not be moved lightly. Meng Zhen's cultivation was still shallow, so no matter how they looked at it, he was the most suitable candidate. Ignoring the question of how to retrieve the treasure, even if the entire realm was destroyed, that still wouldn't necessarily be enough to kill Kong Yin, Yang Chuan, and the others, who could jump out of the outer realm at any time. In fact, it would only force them to attack the mountain and sea realm. Therefore, after thinking about it carefully, he could only give up on this method that seemed to solve the problem once and for all. After discussing for a while, they decided to adopt Zhang Yan's suggestion. Before the other party made a move, they would first attack the Junshin realm. As for how to know when they would arrive, it was not difficult. Moving a realm was not a small matter and would involve many aspects. Such a movement could not be concealed. Even if the 2 sects tried to cover it up, all the mortal metamorphosis cultivators would leave together, and the person in charge would definitely be a true monarch. With Heavenly Devil Sima Quan around, it would not be difficult for him to detect any abnormalities, and they could take the initiative to a certain extent. After the discussion, sect leader Qin said, "There is another matter that I need to let everyone know. Not long ago, Jita received news that he has already opened up a realm with a circumference of 1,000 li in the evil realm. However, the poison gas there is more difficult to get rid of than expected. Right now, he is relying on the Yuan Heavenly Soul to maintain it, but there is a possibility that he will be forced back at any time. Previously, because Kong Yin and the others might be coming, the sects were unable to mobilize people. Now that they have left, we need someone to go and help to stabilize the situation." The evil realm could be considered as the most important route of retreat that the cultivators of the 9 continents had left for themselves. If they were defeated in the battle against the Junshin realm, they could retreat to this place to temporarily hide. Therefore, this matter was also extremely important. Yu Xianxiao said, "We can't just let the Qinsong school fellow Taoists do the work for this matter." He turned and said to Ing Chuanxiu, "Make some preparations and head to the evil realm later." Ing Chuanxiu cupped his hands and said, "Disciple obeys." After a few more words, seeing that there was nothing else to do, everyone took their leave. Zhang Yan also returned his spirit into his body. He sat for a while and called Jingyu over. He asked, "Is there anything recently?" Jingyu said, "There is a matter. The upper extreme hall has sent a letter. Master has been in seclusion, so I will have to disturb you in the future. Please take a look." As he spoke, he had already presented a golden letter. After Zhang Yan took it, he flipped through it and said, "That white lion actually has such a background. No wonder Taoist Shui just now is asking about it." The letter said that a few days ago, the Qinsong school sent out Qin Nan and Qin Feng, 2 Taoist masters who had just now become heavenly abodes. With the help of 3 heavenly ghost great sages, they managed to capture the white lion from the northern lands. However, things didn't end there. In the place where the white lion was entrenched, the 2 of them discovered a palace city. It was very similar to the one that had fallen from the western lands, except that it was much smaller, only 1/10 of the size. It also had the sect's eroding runes and restrictive spells. Chen and Qin were unable to enter. Originally, they had hoped to ask the white lion how to get in and out of it, but after further investigation, they discovered that the demon had been captured from the mountain and sea realm to guard the palace gate. Furthermore, it had been there for several generations, and thus was unable to enter either. Because Zhang Yan had previously broken through the palace gates, Qiyun Tian had asked the sect master and sent a letter, hoping that Zhang Yan could find some time to come here and get rid of this hidden danger. However, at that time, Zhang Yan had been in seclusion, so it had been delayed. After reading it, Zhang Yan flicked his finger, and the letter instantly turned into dust. He stood up. Now that the people from the Great Dust Realm had retreated, there was no longer any threat from the outside. He had to deal with this matter as soon as possible. Chapter 1385. After Zhang Yan left the hall, he rode on the boar bull and headed north. After 10 days, he arrived at the place occupied by the white lion. He looked down from the sky and saw that the terrain here was as flat as the West Wasteland. There were no ups or downs. There was only a huge mound on the land, and there were many temples built on top of it. There were scattered rays of light flying around the surroundings as if they were patrolling. Thus, he urged the boar bull to moo and slowly floated towards that direction. Chen Feng was reading through some documents within the palace on the hill. After he'd formed his abode, he'd naturally become the new patriarch of the Chen clan. At this moment, it wasn't just the matters of the sect, there were many matters of the clan that required his decision. At this moment, he suddenly sensed something. He saw a spiritual light in the sky and a clear air filled the ground. Looking at the direction, it came from the south. He knew that there were cultivators from the sect here. When he saw the boar bull, he said, "So it's Hall Master Du Zhen." He immediately left the palace and soared into the sky. He took the initiative to greet them and bowed from afar. "Hall Master Du Zhen greets you." Zhang Yan sat on the back of the boar bull and returned the greeting. "Sage Chen greets you." Chen Feng said, "Did Hall Master Du Zhen come here to remove the restrictions of the palace?" Zhang Yan smiled. "That's right." Chen Feng also smiled and nodded. "I've been waiting for you. Please follow me." The two of them descended from the sky and landed on the top of the mound. There were many cultivators of the Qinsong school here. When they saw them, they all went up to greet them respectfully. Chen Feng waved his hand and ordered, "All of you retreat. Keep an eye on the surroundings and don't let the demons come close." Everyone bowed and went outside to be on guard. Although the Yutsang sect occupied this area, it was still too far away from the main sect, and there were many demons and beasts in the vicinity. Zhang Yan discovered that as soon as he arrived here, he felt a force concealing his senses. As a result, he was unable to see what was below. This was very similar to the situation he had encountered in the West, but in comparison, it was a little smaller. Chen Feng led the way, and the two of them walked down the hill until they reached a concave area on the mountain wall. The place was overgrown with weeds, and there was a cave on the side wall. It was 10 zhang tall. It was spacious, but its location was extremely secretive. He walked towards the entrance of the cave and walked down a winding tunnel. After a while, a rough stone door appeared in front of him. Chen Feng said, "That palace is buried underground. When Dao Master Zither and I came here earlier, we thought it was just an ordinary monster's lair. If it weren't for the fact that we wanted to see if there were any other monsters hiding inside, it would have been difficult to discover it." Zhang Yan glanced at the stone door. It was barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. There was nothing on top of it. If someone who didn't know the inside story came here, they would never think that there was a big city hidden inside. He looked around again. Seeing that there was nothing else apart from this tunnel, he asked, "I heard that the white lion used to live here. Where does it usually stay?" Chen Feng replied, "The blood and qi of the white lion's ancestral veins seem to have been planted with a talisman. Once it entered this place, it turned into a stone lion guarding the door. It will only wake up when a living creature approaches." Zhang Yan nodded. Chen Feng waved his sleeve. The stone door was pushed open. There was a row of jade steps with pearls embedded on both sides. A bronze lamp hung on top, shaped like a golden phoenix spreading its wings. Zhang Yan saw it and thought to himself, "It really has something to do with the Golden Imperial Order." The two of them walked down, but after 100 steps, they were blocked by a wide stone door. He looked at it and saw that there were strange patterns carved on it. It was almost the same as what he saw in the west. Chen Feng said, "Tao Master, this is the eroding runes restriction. Can you break it?" Zhang Yan looked at it for a while. Then he said, "It will take some time. I will have to trouble Tao Master Chen to protect me." Chen Feng cupped his hands and bowed. He retreated to the stone door that they came in from. Zhang Yan sat down cross-legged and began to deduce. Because he had done it once before, it was extremely fast this time. 2 days later, he stood up and pressed his hand down. With a rumble, the door opened. However, dozens of rays of light shot out from inside. Zhang Yan's gaze was indifferent as he allowed the rays of light to pass through his body. These were just illusions. Standing in place without moving was the correct way to deal with them. If he tried to dodge, he would trigger a deeper seal. The door would close again, and the inscriptions above would change. This time, it would not be so easy to open it. If it was not a disciple of the Golden Imperial Order, it would be difficult to understand the profoundness of this, and it was very likely that they would fall for it. Unfortunately, the person who set up the restriction did not expect it. A cultivator at the mortal metamorphosis level would come here, and all these arrangements would be useless. Chen Feng sensed the movement and walked in cautiously. He asked, "Tao Master?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Don't worry. Tao Master Chen, the door is open. Why don't you come in and take a look?" Chen Feng glanced at the interior of the room and nodded in agreement. Zhang Yan was the first to enter. Compared to the palaces he saw in Shihuang, this place was much simpler and shabbier. The pearls were replaced by golden patterns, and the pillars used to support the palace were ordinary gold and bronze pillars instead of the dragon's spine. However, the spiritual vigor was very strong, and it maintained the equipment in this place from being damaged. This was only the front hall. Even if there were valuable items, they would not be displayed here openly. Therefore, he did not stay for long. After giving Chen Feng some instructions, he stepped on the qi and rode the wind, quickly arriving at the second hall. After passing by a screen wall, he looked up and saw a golden lawn jade elephant on a high platform at the end. It was the same as the one he saw before, and it was this object that blocked his own senses. There were also praying mats placed below. At a glance, there were about 100 of them, and they were clean and tidy. He knew that this was a place of worship for the Golden Luan School disciples. From the number of praying mats, he could tell that there had been about 100 people in the palace. But then a question arose in his mind. All of the disciples in the monastery in the western reaches had been killed by Zhuang's formless heavenly astral shield. If the disciples here hadn't left with the palace, then where had they gone? If they had passed on their teachings here, then the mountain and sea realm would no longer be dominated by the Tao of Qi and blood. But if they hadn't met with any mishaps, then why had they abandoned this place? And where were they now? If they were all dead, then it would be one thing. But if they were still hiding somewhere, then even if 100,000 years had passed, he still had to find them. He floated in front of the jade elephant and tried it. As expected, he couldn't put it into his sleeve, so he didn't take it immediately. Instead, he planned to investigate the place first before returning to deal with it. After looking around for a bit, he didn't see anything, so he continued on to the back of the palace. This was a place where the disciples practiced cultivation. There were quite a few jade slips in the niches on either side of the wall, all of which were well preserved. He waved his hand, and all of the jade slips flew over to him. There were about 200 of them, all of which swirled around in the outer area. Then he sent his divine will into the inner area, and found that most of the jade slips were records of techniques and Taoist magics. However, they were very crude, and were clearly meant for use by lower-level disciples. Even the ones in Zhuang's collection were better than the ones he had just seen. Seeing that he couldn't find anything, he flicked his sleeve and put the jade slips back in their original positions. Then he continued onward, searching through several more palace halls, but to no avail. Finally, he came to a large stone wall, upon which was a mural of a golden luan. The vicious bird was glaring angrily, flapping its wings and extending its beak, as if it were struggling with something. However, There was something missing on the opposite side of the wall, as if someone had deliberately shaved it away. Zhang Yan noticed that there was a strange spiritual vigor coming from the golden Luan's eyes. He squinted his eyes slightly. A small world. He thought for a moment. Maybe there were clues about the master of this palace hidden here. However, at this moment, he could feel that this small world was clearly on the verge of collapse, and it could turn into nothingness at any time. If he went in now, it was very likely that he would be trapped inside if he was unlucky. Although it wouldn't be life-threatening, he might not be able to find the way back. He used his magic power, turned it into a shadow doppelganger, and ordered it to walk in. After a long time, footsteps were heard. It was Qin Feng who also entered the palace. He also noticed the small world, and his eyes narrowed. He asked in a deep voice, "Immortal, could it be that the people here are hiding inside?" Zhang Yan shook his head. This small world is not maintained by anyone. Now that it has reached its end, no one can live inside. Chen Feng asked, "I heard that you also encountered a small world in the Western Reaches Imperial Palace. Is that true?" "Correct," Zhang Yan replied. "However, this small world is older than the one I saw in the Western Reaches. However, that's not surprising. Someone from the Golden Luan School found this world first, and only now did they find it. It's highly likely that this place was left behind by someone from the Golden Luan School." Qin Feng frowned. "I wonder if there are any other small worlds? Could the disciple still be hiding inside?" Zhang Yan smiled. "There might be. However, there have been no movements in the past 100,000 years. Either something unexpected happened, or they don't want to show themselves. If they are in the mountain and sea realm," Qin Feng said firmly, "then we will definitely find them." Zhang Yan waved his sleeve, causing the mountains and rivers of the mountain and sea realm to appear in front of him. He pointed to the north, then to the west. "These two places are the Imperial Palace of the Western Reaches and where we are right now. Immortal Qin, do you see anything?" Qin Feng looked at it for a moment, then said with a serious expression, "Based on these two places, could it be that there are two similar places in the east and south?" Zhang Yan nodded. "That's possible." Qin Feng took a deep breath. "It seems we need to report this matter to the sect as soon as possible." Zhang Yan glanced at him. "I once heard that there are quite a few flood dragons entrenched in the vast ocean beyond the eastern wastelands. However, they rarely come to the land. If we take the Graben as the central point, then the eastern sea and the western reaches will coincide with those flood dragons. If a greater demon is born among them, it won't be easy to deal with. If we want to investigate that area, we need to be as careful as possible." Qin Feng clasped his hands respectfully and said, "Many thanks for the warning, Immortal Qin." At this moment, Zhang Yan's expression changed slightly. He saw the light on the door of the world pass light up, and then the figure appeared. However, in his hand was an artifact that flickered with silver light, and it was like a carved cage. It was the dual dimension dial. When he took it in his hand and examined it, his eyes flashed slightly. There was actually a seal on it, as if he was afraid that others would use it to discover him. However, he didn't know why he did this. The reason was indeed worth investigating. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.